Hey guys, tonight we begin your slow trudge through medieval life, starting with just how gross, cold, and muddy your new home is. The wind outside howls like a wounded animal. It slips through cracks in the wooden shutters, snakes beneath the ill-fitting door, and settles into the corners of your tiny, dark cottage like an uninvited ghost. The floor is packed earth, uneven, damp, and recently trodden by chickens, probably. You don't remember letting the chickens in, but you don't remember them leaving either, so there's that. Your bed is straw. Not a straw mattress. No, just straw. Loose, itchy, and occasionally shifting under you as if something small and alive is also using it as a bed. A rat? Probably. You can't afford to care. The smell is a mix of smoke, sweat, and last week's dinner, which was boiled turnip and sadness. Welcome to your new life, sometime in the 14th century. You live in a one-room hut, no larger than a modern-day studio apartment, except with more bugs and less plumbing. The ceiling is low. You have to duck slightly if you're taller than 5 feet, which you might not be, thanks to the effects of nutrition or the lack of it. You were born here. You'll probably die here. The furthest you've ever traveled is the next village over, and that was a big day. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rub the sleep from your eyes with a sleeve that smells like hay and wood smoke. There's no coffee, no hot shower, no snooze button. Your alarm clock is your father stomping around in his clogs and muttering about goats. The sun hasn't even risen properly. There's only the dull glow of early gray light seeping in through a greasy little window pane made from stretched animal bladder. You sit up slowly because your back already hurts and stretch your legs over the edge of the straw pile. The chill bites your toes instantly. You jam your feet into the nearest leather wrappings and try not to think about the rat again. This is England, probably, but honestly, it doesn't matter. Germany, France, Italy, if you're poor, the vibes are universally bleak. You're a peasant. That's not just a class, it's a lifestyle. 90% of people live like you do. You till land you don't own. You grow crops you don't keep. You pay taxes you don't understand to a lord you'll never meet. Outside, the air smells like damp wood and manure. Always manure. The village is a loose cluster of homes like yours, with smoke puffing from crooked chimneys and pigs rooting through ditches. The roads are not roads, just well-worn tracks of mud where wagons and boots have churned the ground into a thick, slurping mess. You know the sound shhhlrp because every time you walk through it, you briefly consider just staying stuck and letting fate take you. Historians still argue whether village life was truly this miserable all the time or if chroniclers exaggerated for dramatic effect. But either way, you're cold, hungry, and slightly itchy in places you'd rather not discuss. And then there's the noise. Dogs bark constantly. Chickens cluck. Somewhere, a child is already crying, which could be anything from teething to being lightly sat on by a cow. The church bell rings in the distance, deep and hollow like the soundtrack to a very long funeral. That bell is your timekeeper. There are no clocks here, no wristwatches. Time is measured by prayers, sun positions, and the occasional scream when someone drops a scythe on their foot. You shuffle to the door. The wood creaks like it's in pain. You nudge it open and step outside into the soft crunch of frost. It's spring, allegedly. But it doesn't feel like it. A rooster eyes you judgmentally. He probably slept better than you. Someone's already at the communal well, hauling up water with a creaky wooden bucket and muttering about ghosts in the forest. You nod at them. They nod back. No one talks much in the morning because no one has the energy. Quirky detail? Well, your neighbor swears by hanging sprigs of garlic around his door to ward off fairies. Another has painted a red X above his lintel to keep out demons. Both are very serious about this. The garlic guy hasn't had a goat stolen in weeks. Coincidence? You can't read or write, of course. Almost no one can. There might be a priest who can read Latin and the Lord's steward, maybe, but that's it. Your world is oral, songs, stories, rumors, curses. Gossip spreads faster than the pox, and it's usually more entertaining. There's a church in the center of the village. It's big, by comparison, stone, with stained glass windows that nobody understands but everyone respects. You'll be there a lot, and not just for mass. It's also where news is shouted, where deals are made, and where you pray feverishly during crop failure. You step out farther, and your foot immediately sinks into a hidden puddle. Ice cold. Possibly manure adjacent. You don't even flinch anymore. That's how you know you've adapted. The firewood pile is low. You'll need more today. Your chores are already waiting. gathering sticks, feeding animals, scraping out the hearth, and pretending you don't hear your mother asking about that missing egg. No phones, no memes, no oat milk lattes. Just frost, chores, and the smell of wet wool. Welcome to the mud ages. You'll fit right in. You wake up in a stone house with no plumbing, no heating, and a suspicious puddle by your feet. That puddle? Probably not rainwater. It's just as likely to be the slow seep of last night's chamber pot overflow. The smell has a tangy sharpness to it, aged like a bad wine. You don't really want to know. Your brain, kind as it is, files it under, just don't step there, and leaves it at that. Stone houses sound romantic, quaint little cottages nestled in hills. But yours is cold, damp, and more like a miniature dungeon with a roof. And the roof leaks, by the way. The walls weep moisture year-round, and any attempt to hang fabric results in instant mildew. It's like living inside a cave if the cave had drafty corners and a few rodents who refuse to pay rent. The hearth is the heart of the home, literally the only source of heat. And even that's tricky. The wood's damp, the smoke curls back down the chimney, and if the wind blows the wrong way, your entire house smells like scorched socks and disappointment. At least it keeps the fleas temporarily confused. You crouch next to the hearth, nudging the coals with a stick you keep nearby for just this purpose. No matches, no lighters, fire means flint, steel, and hopefully some dry straw, assuming the rats haven't turned it into a nursery again. Outside the shutters, another wind gust screams past, rattling everything that isn't nailed down. You're wearing the same clothes as yesterday. And the day before that. And the week before that. You have exactly one shirt. It's a linen tunic and it's seen better centuries. You might have a second one, but it's currently being worn by your cousin who borrowed it last harvest and never gave it back. As you shuffle across the room, the flagstones make your feet ache. There's no insulation. Your soles are practically touching frost. You step around the puddle like it's radioactive. The kids are already awake, barefoot, slightly sticky, and fighting over a crust of bread like it's the last slice of pizza at a party. The concept of a toilet? Oh, how modern. Your options are limited, the chamber pot in the corner or the privy, which is just a plank over a pit behind the house. You use the pot at night, everyone does, and someone, usually the youngest or the least fortunate, is in charge of emptying it in the morning. That job rotates. Today, it's you. You pick it up carefully, trying not to breathe through your nose. The cold makes it worse, sharpens the scent into something chemical and unforgettable. Outside, you trudge through frozen mud to the edge of the yard where a shallow ditch acts as the waste stream. You dump the contents, hoping no one is walking past at that moment. One time, old Tomas was caught downwind and he still insists his mustache hasn't smelled right since. Historians still argue whether sanitation in medieval villages was as universally terrible as chroniclers make it out to be. Some towns had surprisingly decent waste management systems, rudimentary, yes, but intentional. Still, for most peasants, cleanliness was more theoretical than practiced. You return inside, hands stiff from the cold, and warm them near the hearth, which is now bravely sputtering. Someone's thrown on another log. It hisses like it's annoyed at being involved. You glance up. The ceiling is black with soot. No chimney cap. The smoke rises, but not all of it. Everything you own smells like fireplace now. It's not the cozy scent of cedar and cinnamon. No, this is a clinging, lung-coating smoke that will eventually give you a cough you'll pretend not to notice for 5 years. A rooster crows outside, startling the goat, who headbutts a wooden bucket. The entire village orchestra is now awake, clucks, bleats, creaks, and coughs. Your neighbors are probably having the same morning as you, stepping around puddles, poking firewood, and wondering if they'll ever be warm again. And yet, no one complains much. There's no one to complain to. You just do what you've always done, get up, try not to freeze, and start the day. There's a strange comfort in the predictability, if not the luxury. You open the shutters to let in some light, gray, pale, and watery though it may be. Outside, someone's already trudging past with a bundle of sticks strapped to their back. You nod. They nod. That's as close to good morning as it gets around here. A quirky tidbit? Your aunt once claimed that putting your boots upside down at the hearth would keep away evil spirits. Unfortunately, it also let a mouse crawl inside. She didn't notice until she tried to put it on. There was screaming. The mouse survived. You pour a bit of yesterday's weak ale into a cracked mug. No clean drinking water, everyone drinks ale or watered-down wine. Safer, they say, though what they mean is less likely to make your intestines explode. Your breakfast is waiting on the table, coarse rye bread that could double as a weapon and a smear of something that might have once been cheese. The bread is hard. You soften it by dipping it in the ale like some grim parody of biscotti and espresso. The fire cracks a bit louder. The smoke thickens. Someone sneezes wetly and you silently guess who's getting sick next. Probably you. Again, there's something ancient and unyielding about this kind of morning. It grinds you down, not with drama but with slow erosion. One draft, one splinter, one step across freezing stone at a time. You grab your cloak, it's basically just a heavy wool rectangle with a hole for your head, and step outside again. Mist curls at the edges of the yard. Your breath puffs in front of you. The pigs grunt a greeting. One of them might have stolen a turnip from the neighbor. It's impossible to say. And yet, this is normal. This is home. Not glamorous, not clean, not warm, but home. You shuffle into the yard, dragging your boots through the sludge that was once grass, trying to pretend the biting wind is invigorating instead of soul-shriveling. It's time for your daily ritual, fetching water. Because in medieval times, hydration isn't just a lifestyle choice, it's a full-body workout. The village well is about a 5-minute walk away, 10 if you're careful not to spill, 15 if you're trying not to freeze to death. Carrying water is a job that never ends. It's like being stuck in a medieval version of a CrossFit circuit, except the reward isn't abs, it's basic survival. Your bucket is wooden, leaky, and smells faintly of fermented something. You hoist it and head off, nodding at a neighbor who's already ahead of you with 2 buckets balanced on a yoke across his shoulders. Show off. You tried the yoke method once, but it bruised your collarbone and made you walk like a wounded duck for 2 days. The path is muddy, as always. You slip. Catch yourself. Pretend it didn't happen. A chicken observes you silently from a fence post, judgmental as ever. You reach the well, already surrounded by a few early risers. The rope creaks as someone hauls up a dripping bucket. You take your turn, grabbing the rough hemp rope, careful not to let it burn your palms. The pulley sticks. You jiggle it. It lets go with a loud groan and suddenly the bucket drops faster than you meant. It hits the water with a wet slap. Then, the crank. You wind it back up slowly, arm muscles straining. The bucket emerges heavy, sloshing, and very, very cold. You pour it into your own container. Just like that, you've completed the most basic task that a 21st century faucet could do in seconds. Historians still argue whether peasants had consistent access to clean water or if contamination was more episodic, depending on geography and local habits. Either way, you definitely don't trust the clarity of this well water. It looks suspiciously beige, but beggars and medieval villagers aren't choosers. On the way back, your arms start to tremble. This bucket seems heavier than usual. Is it the water or the existential weight of being born 700 years too early? Hard to say. A small boy runs past you with a slingshot, nearly knocks over your bucket, and you resist the urge to invent time travel just to go back and raise him better. You keep walking one step at a time, sloshing rhythmically. Your boots squelch. The wind howls. You hum a little tune under your breath to distract yourself from the fact that your fingers are slowly turning into icicles. By the time you make it back, your forearms are burning and your nose is dripping. You place the bucket carefully by the hearth. This will serve the household's needs for washing, drinking, cooking, and maybe, if you're feeling luxurious, a sponge bath that involves more sponge than bath. The rest of the family doesn't even notice your return. They're too busy trying to scrape yesterday's porridge off a bowl with what might be the back of a spoon. You sit down, muscles twitching, and reward yourself with a sip of ale because hydration must be paired with fermentation for authenticity. Next up on the survival checklist? Washing. Or at least something vaguely pretending to be it. You grab a scrap of cloth, dip it in the icy water, and dab at your face. It's shocking. Like dunking your cheeks in liquid snow. You gasp. Consider crying. Don't. Baths are rare, and when they happen, they're events. The tub, a shared wooden barrel, is filled once and used by everyone in order of importance. Which means you, as someone not exactly at the top of the family totem pole, get in last. By then the water is chunky. One time you swore it blinked at you. A quirky tidbit? Some medieval folks believed bathing too often opened the pores and let disease in. So, if you're wondering why everyone smells like old bread and goat, that's partially by design. Still, cleanliness happens in layers. Rinse the hands, scrub the feet, change into the least crusty tunic you own. You'd kill for a warm shower and a peppermint soap bar. But instead, you rub behind your ears and pretend that counts. You glance outside. The morning fog is lifting, revealing thatched rooftops and smoking chimneys. A dog barks in the distance. Maybe it found something edible. Or something pretending to be edible. Your next task awaits, collecting firewood. Because the hearth, while stubbornly smoky, still needs feeding. The pile outside is dwindling, and unless you fancy a night of shivering so violently you start a new dance craze, it's time to restock. The woods are about a quarter mile away. You grab a woven basket and head off, the path worn and muddy, your breath fogging out like you're part dragon. You gather twigs, branches, and hopefully a few logs not too waterlogged to burn. The occasional squirrel watches from the trees, twitching like it knows something you don't. By the time you return, your fingers are raw, but you've got a decent bundle. You toss it by the hearth with a satisfying thud. Victory! In a world without microwaves, central heating, or electricity, every stick is sacred. As you sit back, taking in the aroma of wet wood, damp wool, and faint goat, you consider the absurdity of your current reality. 1,000 years from now, someone will complain that their smart fridge is out of oat milk, and here you are celebrating the successful relocation of slightly damp sticks. But that's medieval life, no task too small, no win too petty. You made it through morning chores with all your limbs intact and your bucket unspilled. That's practically a party. You're halfway through the day and somehow, despite having done more manual labor than a reality show contestant on a survival island, you're still expected to put in a full shift. Because congratulations, you're a medieval peasant and leisure time is basically a myth unless you're unconscious. Today, you're working the fields. Again. Because food doesn't magically appear in a stone bowl unless you've been blessed by some long-forgotten harvest god, and let's be honest, you haven't exactly been racking up divine favors lately. You trudge out past the village fence, boots squishing in the same muddy ruts you walked yesterday, and the day before, and basically every day since you could hold a spade. The field stretches before you, brown and lumpy and full of more rocks than any reasonable field should legally contain. You grab your wooden hoe. It's splintery and awkward, the handle worn smooth by generations of equally exhausted ancestors. You start hacking at the soil, rhythmically turning it over, hoping you don't disturb anything too terrifying. Like a rat or worse, a medieval earthworm the size of a bratwurst. Here's the mainstream fact for today. During much of medieval Europe, especially under feudalism, peasants were required to spend a significant portion of their time working the land for their local lord. You don't own this land. You work it because the lord lets you stay in your little hut without evicting you. In return, he gets a cut of your crops, often the best part. And here's where the real kicker comes in. Even during planting season, you're also expected to tend to your own patch of garden or backyard strip where you grow what little you're actually allowed to eat. So you're working 2 plots, one for survival, one for rent. Sleep is optional. Complaining gets you nothing but a long stare and probably more work. Your hands are already blistering, even through the thin layer of wool wrapped around your palms. You glance around at the others, their faces stoic and sunken, like people who gave up dreaming 3 decades ago. Someone sneezes violently. Everyone ignores it. Medieval etiquette. As you swing again at a particularly stubborn clump of clay, you remember hearing that in some parts of Europe, pigs were used to till the soil. Smart pigs. Strong pigs. You glance at your hoe and sigh. You are not a pig. You are but a tired, undercaffeinated human with a bad back and no ergonomic tools. And the weather? Predictably moody. The sky, never quite sunny, carries the permanent hue of disappointment. A drizzle starts up, just enough to soak your shoulders without actually watering the soil. Classic medieval microclimate. Still, the soil needs to be turned, the seeds scattered, and eventually, if you're lucky, some food will grow. Mostly barley or rye. Maybe onions if you're feeling fancy. Wheat, that's practically gold. And if it's a bad harvest year, which historians still argue was more frequent than we'd like to believe, you're basically toast. Or you would be if toast existed yet. A quirky historical tidbit for you. Scarecrows were actually in use during this time, sometimes made from sticks and animal bones, or occasionally old tunics stuffed with straw. Yours? It's leaning like it just lost a bar fight, but the birds are at least confused enough to keep their distance. For now, you take a break, wiping your brow with a sleeve that's already soaked. You look up and spot the manor house in the distance, tall and smug and built from proper stone. That's where the Lord lives. You've never been inside. You're not meant to, but you know that up there, firewood burns without rationing and ale is poured without counting. Someone nearby mutters about a blight. Another says the moon looks wrong this week. Superstition is the medieval version of small talk. If something goes wrong with the crops, it could be bad luck, bad weather, or the angry spirit of that guy we buried too shallow last spring. Lunchtime rolls around. You sit on a rock and pull out a lump of dark rye bread and a piece of cheese hard enough to chip a tooth. It's humble, but it's yours. A neighbor trades you a boiled onion for a sip of your watered-down ale. Deals like this are the medieval stock exchange. You chew in silence, jaw working like a machine, eyes half-lidded. Your body aches in places that shouldn't even exist, and you still have half the field to finish. But there's something weirdly comforting about the routine, the dull, repetitive promise that if you just keep digging, eventually, something will grow. Hopefully not another rock. Back to work. You swing again and again. Each clump of soil yields grudgingly, as if it resents your very presence. There's no fertilizer except animal waste, no irrigation system unless you count dragging water from the stream, and no tractor unless you squint really hard at a particularly muscular donkey. You catch a glimpse of movement in the trees. Maybe a rabbit, maybe something worse. But you've got work to do. Predators don't care that you're hungry. Nature is always circling, sniffing for weakness. As the sun begins to dip, more of a dull slide than a grand set. You gather your tools and shuffle back. Your legs are jelly, your back is a question mark, and your boots have absolutely given up. But you did it. The field is tilled. The seeds are sown. Tomorrow you'll do it all over again. And in this world, that's not punishment. That's just how you stay alive. You make it back to your hut with your arms sagging and your brain somewhere near jelly. The sun is a pale smear on the horizon, casting a kind of muddy gold over everything like it's trying its best but honestly needs a nap too. You step inside, and the familiar scent of damp wool, cooked onions, and faint livestock greets you like a slightly moldy hug. Dinner is happening. Someone's stirring a pot over the hearth, and by the smell of it, you're having pottage again. Surprise. It's what you had yesterday, and the day before that. And, well, let's just say you have a very stable relationship with pottage at this point. Pottage, for the uninitiated, is basically a medieval everything stew. You throw in grains like barley or oats, some root vegetables, water, salt if you're lucky, and maybe, on a truly magical day, a scrap of meat or bone. The longer it simmers, the thicker it gets. Yours looks like it's reached the consistency of a well-used mortar. A mainstream historical fact? Most medieval peasants had incredibly simple diets dominated by bread, pottage, and ale. Vegetables were staples, and meat was rare, mostly reserved for feast days or when something conveniently died near you. Protein came from eggs if you had chickens, or cheese if your goat was in a good mood. You sit on a low bench, legs stretched out, and accept your bowl. It's hot, which is something. You blow on it gently. Steam curls up, carrying with it the faintest hint of turnip and what might be yesterday's cabbage. You take a bite. It's not good. It's not bad. It's edible. Mostly. The others eat in silence, each person wrapped in their own cocoon of fatigue. A child picks at a scrap of bread. A dog lurks nearby, hoping someone's clumsy enough to drop something. You are. The dog wins. While you eat, someone starts recounting local gossip. A man up the road caught his neighbor stealing firewood. A girl found a frog with 3 legs and called it an omen. A cow gave birth to twins. Everyone nods solemnly. It's not exactly breaking news, but out here, every oddity carries weight. Quirky tidbit? People in medieval villages often believed that illness, misfortune, and crop failure were tied to supernatural signs. Animals acting strange, dreams gone awry, or someone giving you the side eye at the market. Superstition was baked into everyday life like oats in your bread. You scrape your bowl clean and set it aside. There's not much after-dinner entertainment unless you count arguing about the weather or staring at the fire until your thoughts start looping. Sometimes someone tells a story, usually one they've told before. Tonight, it's the tale of the blacksmith's haunted anvil. No one interrupts. You all know how it ends, but there's comfort in the retelling. You glance over at the small sack that holds your luxury rations, salt, maybe some dried herbs, and a withered apple that you're saving for a particularly low moment. That sack is your safety net, your medieval snack drawer. You eye the apple. Not yet. Someone mentions that there might be a feast soon. It's a saint's day next week, and the Lord is rumored to be opening his stores to the village. Historians still argue whether these events were truly generous or more of a calculated show to reinforce loyalty. Either way, you're hoping for something that isn't a root vegetable. As night deepens, the hut darkens. Candles are expensive and rare, so most people rely on the hearth light. Shadows flicker along the walls, dancing over the hanging herbs, drying socks, and crooked wooden beams. You pull your cloak tighter and shift closer to the fire. It smokes, as always, and your eyes start to sting. You blink through the haze. A few sparks pop upward, tiny flares of drama in an otherwise quiet room. Sleeping arrangements, they're flexible. Everyone basically piles into whatever bedding exists. Straw mats, old sacks, maybe an actual mattress if you're lucky. You've got a corner claimed near the wall. The straw smells faintly of mildew, but it's dry, which is a win. You hear a rat scurry in the ceiling. No one reacts. Rats are part of the decor. Before sleep, there's one last ritual, checking your feet. Blisters, splinters, and frostbite are common visitors. You peel off your boots slowly, carefully. Your toes are pale and stiff. One nail looks angry. You poke at it. Mistake. You pull your wool sock back on with a wince. There's no bath, no brushing your teeth, no pajamas. Just layers of itchy wool and whatever position makes your spine complain the least. You lie down, curled on your side, and exhale. The wind outside whistles like a distant ghost, but inside, the fire crackles low and steady. Someone snores. A chicken clucks softly in its crate near the door. You drift, halfway between waking and sleep, when the hut suddenly creaks, a sound so old it probably predates architecture. You whisper a small prayer, not because you're especially devout, but because out here, it can't hurt to hedge your bets. Maybe to Saint Isidore, the patron of farmers. Or maybe just to the vague entity in charge of not letting your roof cave in overnight. You're fed. You're warmish. You've survived another day in the Middle Ages. Barely. And honestly, that's kind of impressive. You wake before the sun. Again. Because in the Middle Ages, the rooster is your alarm clock, and this particular rooster is annoyingly punctual. It crows like it's auditioning for a solo in a barnyard opera, and there's no snooze button unless you're feeling brave enough to chase it. You're not. You stretch under your thin wool blanket, feeling every joint click into place like the world's creakiest accordion. Your breath clouds in the cold air because, surprise, your hut doesn't have insulation. Or windows. Or anything remotely resembling climate control. You roll off your straw mat, which now smells faintly of damp socks and whatever small animal tried to burrow in last night. The floor is stone, cracked and uneven, and your bare feet greet it like old frenemies. The coals in the hearth are cold. Someone forgot to bank the fire. That someone might have been you. Whoops. Morning chores await. Because even before a single spoon of pottage hits your mouth, life in a medieval village demands productivity. You step outside into the gray half-light of dawn. The air is sharp and a heavy fog clings low over the thatched rooftops. The village is barely stirring, but you already hear a few muffled coughs, the creak of a cart, and of course, that rooster again. You make a mental note to resent him properly later. Time to fetch water. Your bucket hangs beside the door, warped from use and always a little leaky. You lug it to the communal well a few houses down. The path is muddy and your boots slosh noisily with every step. Morning soundtrack, squelch, squelch, sigh. Mainstream fact time, in most medieval villages, water had to be drawn daily from shared wells, streams, or rain barrels. There was no plumbing, no hot taps, and certainly no filtered. If you were lucky, your source wasn't downstream from the animals. If you weren't, well, let's just say your immune system got a lot of practice. The well is already busy. You wait in line, nodding sleepily to neighbors who look as miserable as you feel. A woman with arms like tree trunks hoists a full bucket with one hand and marches off like she's late to wrestle a bear. You make a mental note to never upset her. Eventually, it's your turn. You drop the bucket, listen to the satisfying splash, and crank it back up. The water's cold, freshish, and slightly gritty. You don't question it. You just carry it back carefully, trying not to spill because refills are not fun. Back at the hut, someone's rekindled the fire. A few embers glow like sleepy eyes. You set the pot to boil, add a bit of grain, and stir slowly. Breakfast is gruel. Again, thinner than last night's pottage with the consistency of regret. You sip it anyway. Today's main task? Animal care. Because what's medieval life without the lovely aroma of livestock in your hair? You head toward the pen behind your home where the family pig, Sir Gruncelot, resides. He greets you with an enthusiastic snort and a mud-splattered charge at the trough. Feeding him is a delicate balance between speed and self-preservation. You dump the slop and dodge his eager face like you're playing a very low-budget gladiator game. quirky tidbit here, pigs in the Middle Ages often roamed freely during the day, scavenging scraps from the village or nearby woods. Some towns even had pig herders who took whole droves out to forage. You're not fancy enough for a pig herder. You've got a leash made of rope and a vague hope he won't eat your shoes. After the pig, it's the chickens. They flap and squawk like you've personally offended them, but you manage to collect a couple of eggs. One is cracked. One is suspiciously warm. The third is perfect. Victory. Somewhere across the fields, a bell tolls faintly from the church tower. Time for morning prayers. You're not especially pious, but skipping can raise eyebrows and you'd rather not be the subject of this week's gossip circle. So you trudge along with the others to the tiny stone chapel at the village's center. Historians still argue whether these daily religious gatherings were heartfelt spiritual experiences or just routine social obligations. For you, it's a mix. The chanting is calming, the candlelight soft, and the priest's droning voice makes your eyelids flutter. You pretend to listen, mouth the Latin half correctly, and mentally draft a to-do list. Chop firewood, repair the fence, try not to get trampled by your own pig. Back at your hut, the sun is finally up and the day feels fully underway. You split a log for kindling, more accurately, you take several awkward swings before the log finally gives up out of pity. Your axe is dull, your arms are sore, and you start seriously considering life as a monk. Monks have wine. And books. And maybe warmer floors. But no, you're a villager. Which means next up, cleaning. You sweep the dirt floor. Yes, sweeping a dirt floor sounds like a joke, but in the Middle Ages, it's real. The goal is to move out the worst of the muck, not achieve shine. You toss the sweepings into a pile and shoo out a mouse. He looks mildly offended. You check your fence, repair a few loose branches, and stare out at the woods beyond. It's quiet. Too quiet. You wonder about wolves, or bandits, or forest spirits, depending on how sleep-deprived you are. Then you remember the rooster, and the fantasy dissolves into mild irritation. As midday creeps closer, the rhythm of life slows just a bit. Someone plays a wooden flute nearby badly. A child chases a goose and loses. A neighbor waves, offering a wrinkled apple in trade for help with her roof later. You agree. Apples are currency now. You sit down on a stone step, stretch your aching legs, and take a deep breath. The air smells like smoke, manure, and spring grass. You lean back and let your eyes close just for a moment. You made it through another morning. The church bell rings out again, once, twice, a third time. It's noon. Your stomach grumbles on cue as if trained by Pavlov himself, except instead of a feast, it's more of a snack event. If you're lucky, you rise slowly, knees cracking like the lid of an old chest, and make your way back inside your hut. The fire's still going, thanks to your earlier efforts, and there's a faint scent of onions and hope lingering in the air. You reach for your lunch, yesterday's pottage reheated with some barley and the lone egg you didn't trade this morning. It's hot, filling, and surprisingly comforting, despite tasting like something you'd politely decline in the 21st century. You chew slowly, letting the warmth spread from your mouth to your toes. There's a bit of crunch. You don't ask questions. Outside, the village is wide awake. The blacksmith's hammer rings in rhythm, dogs bark at shadows, and kids shriek as they chase each other between carts. It's time to get back to work. Today's communal task, maintenance. Because in a medieval village, shared labor keeps everything running, ditches need clearing, thatch needs patching, and someone has to figure out what's clogging the drainage trench. Spoiler, it's always something gross. You and a few neighbors gather at the edge of the village where runoff from the rain has created a charming little bog. It smells faintly of decay and disappointment. Armed with shovels, you begin scooping muck and debris, occasionally uncovering the odd frog, broken shoe, or very confused worm. Mainstream historical fact: medieval villages often had rudimentary drainage systems consisting of shallow ditches and trenches. These helped divert water away from homes and fields but required constant attention, or you ended up with flooded huts and very wet pigs. You're not just hauling mud. You're avoiding being splashed by the guy next to you who seems to treat this like a sport. You angle your shovel defensively. He grins. It's an unspoken trench war now. By mid-afternoon, you're knee-deep in sludge, your arms are jelly, and your nose is entirely numb to the smell. You pause for a break and look around. Someone's handing out bread, coarse, dense loaves that could double as paving bricks. You accept yours gratefully, tearing it with your teeth because slicing isn't an option when knives are few and dull. As you chew, someone points toward the sky. Smoke curling thin and lazy in the distance, too far for concern, too close to ignore. A cottage fire? A field burn? You squint. Could be anything. You make a mental note to ask Father Aldrich later. He knows everything, or at least pretends to. You return to the trench for a final round of muck wrestling before the village bell rings once more, signaling the shift to personal chores and preparations for supper. You stagger home with mud in your boots and hay in your hair. You don't remember stepping in hay. Curious. Inside, you set water to heat and begin rinsing off in what can generously be called a bath basin, really just a large wooden bowl with ambition. You splash your face and hands, scrubbing away the day's grime with a rough cloth that might also double as a towel, blanket, or emergency curtain. Your clean clothes, well, less dirty clothes, are waiting nearby. You slip into them and instantly feel 6% more civilized. The fire crackles softly now, and for a moment, the hut feels almost cozy. Time for supper. You've managed to trade for some wild garlic and a heel of hard cheese. It's not much, but with a bit of your barley left from earlier, you fashion something resembling a porridge with personality. You eat slowly, watching shadows flicker across the walls. The day's aches settle into your muscles like tenants refusing to leave. Quirky tidbit, in some parts of medieval Europe, people believed placing garlic under your pillow would ward off evil spirits or, if you were unlucky, just attract hungry rats. You opt to keep your garlic in the rafters, just in case. You clean up with the last of the warm water, toss scraps to Sir Gruncelot, who, in return, attempts to eat your sleeve and step outside into the cooling air. Evening is falling like a soft gray blanket over the village. Smoke drifts upward from chimneys, voices drift from windows, and somewhere, a lute plays an out-of-tune melody that still manages to be oddly soothing. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers truly felt close-knit or merely tolerated one another for survival. From your perspective, it's a mix. There's warmth in shared struggle, but also a lot of side-eye over borrowed tools and missing chickens. As night deepens, you visit the chapel again. Not for a formal prayer this time, but because it's quiet and the stone stays warm from the day's sun. You sit in a pew near the back, breathing in the scent of wax and worn wood, listening to the distant wind through the cracks in the glassless windows. You stay until your eyelids begin to droop. Outside, the stars are poking through the fading clouds like silver pinpricks in velvet. The moon is a lazy crescent, casting just enough light to see your way home. You walk slowly, each step a lullaby to your weary feet. Inside your hut, you bank the fire, wrap up in your blanket, and lie down on your straw mattress, which pokes you lovingly in all the wrong places. You stare at the ceiling and let out a long breath. You've survived another full day in medieval times. Barely. Your straw mattress is somehow both itchy and lumpy. You shift once, then twice, and finally give up on comfort altogether. It's dark now, truly dark. Not suburban blackout dark, but the deep, velvety kind that makes you aware of every creak, every hoot, and the occasional rat parade scuttling under the floorboards. But your body is too exhausted to care. You drift, half asleep, half listening to the rhythmic croaks of frogs outside and the occasional owl questioning your life choices. Then a sharp crack. Not thunder. A real crack with splitting. You bolt upright, shouting. The unmistakable panic of many voices at once. You scramble for your boots, still damp, and rush out into the night. The village is lit by a flickering orange glow. Fire. You instinctively run toward it, barefoot, forgetfulness overridden by adrenaline. A cottage on the north end is ablaze, flames dancing skyward like they're auditioning for the role of Apocalypse. People are already forming a bucket line, shouting instructions. Some are crying. A few stand frozen, dazed by the chaos. You grab a bucket and join in, water sloshing onto your tunic, hands freezing, feet sinking into mud. The air smells like panic, smoke, and old timber. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval villages, house fires were catastrophically common. Thatched roofs, open flames, and wooden structures made everything one spark away from disaster. Entire villages sometimes vanished overnight due to one unattended hearth. You pass buckets down the line like your life depends on it because it might. Sparks leap into the air, carried by the wind. You turn your face away as one lands too close, singing a hole into someone's tunic. Shouts grow louder, people move faster, and eventually, finally, the fire begins to die down. The house is half gone, but the rest of the village is safe. The family who lived there is in shock. They stand nearby, wrapped in blankets, their faces blank. A woman clutches her child tightly, eyes red from smoke or tears or both. Someone offers bread. Another offers a place to sleep. That's how things work here. You lose something, you borrow strength from your neighbors. By dawn, you've helped rake out smoldering embers and find yourself carrying blackened timbers to a pile out back. Your muscles scream in protest, your lungs feel smoked like a medieval ham, and your mind is swimming in ash. You finally collapse beside the well, chest heaving. Someone brings you a bit of ale, flat, warm, but wet. You gulp it like it's holy water. Historians still argue whether medieval firefighting methods were coordinated or chaotic. Tonight? Definitely chaotic. But in the midst of it, a strange sense of unity forms. Nobody questions your place. You belong here now, soot-streaked and half-mad from exhaustion. Back in your hut, the smell of smoke has followed you, clinging to your skin, your clothes, your hair. You wipe your face and see a streak of black across your sleeve. You're a mess, and strangely, you're proud of it. You sit near your fire, which now feels more like a tamed beast than a comforting glow. There's still some grain left, so you cook up a small gruel, though your stomach isn't sure if it's hungry or horrified. You eat anyway because medieval you has learned one crucial rule: never waste food, no matter how many disasters you've just survived. Quirky tidbit, in some medieval towns, people hung beehives inside their homes for fire warnings. The bees would buzz violently before flames were visible. You're suddenly grateful your only housemate is Sir Gruncelot and not a swarm of fire-sensing insects. Outside, the village is quieter now. Sooty. Somber. You can see neighbors moving about like ghosts, some sweeping, others comforting. A few try to laugh, but it's brittle like dry straw. You go to offer help to the family who lost their home. They're in another hut for now, huddled together, red-eyed but thankful. You bring a blanket and some garlic-stuffed bread you forgot you had hidden. It's stale, but it's something. The mother thanks you softly. Her child stares at you like you're a hero from a very dusty storybook. You head back toward the commons, where people are gathering to talk about rebuilding. There's a sense of grim purpose. Plans start forming: who can lend timber, who knows how to patch a roof, who has extra thatch. No insurance, no emergency hotline. Just hands. And goodwill. A rooster crows in the distance, as if it somehow missed all the excitement. The sky is the pre-dawn gray that suggests rain is probably coming. You stare at it, wondering if medieval weather has it out for you personally. And then it starts, fat, cold drops falling like celestial bucket dumps. You lift your face toward the sky and just let it happen. You're already soaked, already filthy. Why not embrace it? You finally crawl back inside, too tired to even remove your boots. You lie down and let the patter of rain on the roof lull you. The fire flickers low, casting dancing shadows that feel gentler now. Your fingers twitch involuntarily from the bucket chain, and your arms still carry the echo of lifting, passing, lifting again. But your heart, tired as it is, beats a little steadier. You close your eyes. No rats. No owls. Just the sound of rain and the knowledge that you helped keep this little corner of the world from burning down entirely. For now, your sleep is deep, dreamless, and tinged with the smell of damp ash. Morning doesn't so much arrive as it does seep in through the gaps in your shutters. Light filters through, soft and gray, like it's apologizing for the night before. You groan, stretch, and are instantly reminded that every muscle in your body is now officially on strike. Outside, the village hums at half speed. No one's talking much. Just the soft shuffling of feet, the clink of tools, and the occasional sniffle from someone still recovering from smoke inhalation. You join the others again, not because anyone told you to, but because that's just what you do. Helping is the one currency that never loses value in medieval times. First on today's agenda, rebuilding. You head toward the half-burned cottage from last night, where neighbors are already bringing timber, clay, and bundles of thatch. The air smells of earth and wet straw, and your boots make soft sucking sounds as you walk. You're still carrying that smell of smoke on your skin, but no one mentions it. You're all in it together now. You're handed a crude hammer, really just a chunk of iron with a wooden handle, and assigned to help reframe part of the roof. You've never roofed a thing in your life, but guess what? In medieval times, everyone's an amateur until necessity makes them an expert. Mainstream historical fact: most medieval homes were constructed with wattle and daub, woven wooden slats packed with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. It was affordable, somewhat insulating, and definitely a conversation starter centuries later. You get to work, nailing beams together at strange angles, hoping no one notices that your craftsmanship is about as level as a ship in a storm. Someone hands you a mug of watered ale as encouragement. It's warm and mildly horrifying, but you smile and sip because, again, that's what you do. Sir Gruncelot appears from behind a barrel, snorting at a chicken like he's been personally offended. The chicken, unfazed, continues pecking at the mud like it's living its best life. You and the pig make eye contact. He blinks once. It's probably admiration. As the day goes on, the new walls begin to rise, skeletal and humble. It's not much, but it's shelter. You pause to stretch your back, gaze across the village, and realize something almost poetic. People here aren't just building homes, they're rebuilding peace, one smoky, muddy nail at a time. Quirky tidbit: in some regions, villagers added charms into the walls of new homes: dead cats, horse skulls, even old shoes, to ward off evil spirits. You wonder if that explains the mysterious smell behind your own fireplace. Best not to dig too deep. Midday arrives and with it lunch, if you can call it that. It's a cold turnip, a scrap of salt pork, and a hunk of cheese so hard it might qualify as a weapon. You bite carefully, smiling through the chew. A neighbor offers you a bit of honeycomb she's been saving. It's sweet, sticky, and almost makes you forget the taste of ash. Then someone mentions the taxes. Yes, even in this soot-covered, half-rebuilt world, the tax collector looms. He's due soon, and everyone's scrambling to prepare what little coin or trade goods they can offer. You hear quiet curses and muttered prayers as folks tally their chickens, jars of preserved fruit, and bolts of rough wool. Historians still argue whether medieval taxes were more burdensome than beneficial. Some say they were necessary for maintaining order. Others believe they were thinly veiled extortion wrapped in churchy paperwork. You personally think they're just a very rude way to ruin an afternoon. You head home to dig through your belongings. You count 3 usable spoons, a woven mat that might be worth something, and a decent lump of beeswax. Not exactly a treasure chest, but it'll have to do. You wrap it all in a bit of cloth and set it aside. Later, you join others near the village green where people are quietly comparing their offerings. No one says it, but the tension is real. You all know that the collector doesn't care if you just survived a fire or gave your only blanket to a neighbor. He'll take what's owed and maybe more. You try not to worry. You've already faced fire, rats, and garlic-based hygiene. What's one more disaster? As evening rolls around, the sky is painted in dull pinks and bruised blues. A soft breeze stirs the smoke still lingering over the village, carrying with it the sense of wet hay, roasted leeks, and just a hint of nervous sweat. You sit outside your hut, legs stretched out, watching the clouds drift like lazy sheep. Sir Gruncelot lies nearby, snoring like a tiny blacksmith. A child walks past, holding a rag doll and humming a tune you vaguely recognize from the chapel choir. The village feels quieter now, not in mourning, but in recovery. You hear the thud of a hammer, the laugh of someone who just found their missing goat, and the squabble of teenagers arguing over who gets to sleep closest to the fire. And through it all, you sit grateful for the simplicity of this moment. You haven't had a proper bath in days. You're sore, you're broke, and you smell like a campfire's armpit. But you're still here. And in medieval times, that counts for a lot. You wake to a knock. Not a polite, modern knock. This is the kind of knock that says, "Open up or I'll use your door as firewood." You groggily roll off your straw pile and hobble across the dirt floor, flinging the door open with all the enthusiasm of a damp sponge. There he stands, the tax collector. His robes are dark and just a bit too clean, as if he lives above the laws of soot. He has the face of someone who enjoys counting money slightly more than talking to people, and the smug air of a man who knows no one can say no. Beside him stands a thin clerk holding a scroll long enough to use as a carpet runner. He doesn't greet you. He just glances at your modest hut and says, "You know why I'm here?" "Yes." "Unfortunately." You hand over your bundle, your spoons, the beeswax, your possibly magic mat, and try to look humble. The clerk makes a note, nods, and gives your home one last assessing glance. You're not sure if he's inspecting for additional goods or judging your taste in wall-mounted garlic strings. Mainstream historical fact: tax collection in medieval Europe came in many forms: tithes to the church, rents to lords, tolls at bridges, market fees, hearth taxes, even a window tax if you had too many. Basically, if you owned it or used it, someone probably found a way to tax it. You return to your seat, lighter by a few possessions and one existential sigh. The collector moves on to the next hut, his cloak swishing like a judgmental shadow. You overhear a neighbor muttering, "Next time he comes, I'll give him the goat and see how he likes it." You silently hope the goat is in a biting mood that day. Later, after the taxing ordeal, the village seems oddly subdued. Conversations are whispered. Children are told to keep quiet. Even Sir Gruncelot, usually snorty and oblivious, senses the tension and nestles himself beneath a bench with a pout. You wander toward the fields for some air. It's planting season again, or close to it, and the land needs turning. Several villagers are already out there, digging rows with wooden spades, backs bent like old trees. You join them. Because of course you do. You grab a plow handle and press into the soil, feeling it give way beneath you in clumps. It's hard, slow work, and your hands develop new blisters to keep the old ones company. But there's something meditative about it. The rhythmic push, the smell of dirt, the occasional worm you greet like an old friend. At least worms don't demand taxes. Quirky tidbit: some medieval farmers believed singing to the soil made crops grow better. You hum a few bars of a tune you vaguely recall from somewhere, part hymn, part lullaby, mostly off-key, and hope the earth appreciates the effort. A young boy nearby is chasing crows with a stick and the serious expression of someone defending a castle. You smile, even laugh a little, and he salutes you like a general before returning to his flapping, shouting, and general bird-bothering. The day wears on. The sun plays peekaboo with the clouds, and the breeze carries the scent of nearby flowers trying their best to outgrow winter. You take a break, drinking from a leather flask filled with something between cider and confusion. It helps dull the ache in your spine. Historians still argue whether serfs had any real autonomy. Some records suggest small freedoms, others paint a picture of near-total dependence on landowners. Either way, the people in your village find pride where they can, in a straight furrow, a fat turnip, a song hummed in the dirt. After the fields, it's back to the commons where a meeting is forming. The reeve, sort of a village mayor with less power and more headaches, calls people together. He stands on a barrel, for height, mostly, and begins to read announcements. A nearby festival is being planned. Someone's cow has gone missing again, and there's going to be a marriage next week. This last bit sparks a ripple of murmurs. Marriage is a big deal here. Not just the joining of two people, but of two families, two resources, two dowries if you're lucky. Also, it means a feast, which, let's be honest, is the part everyone cares about. You're invited, of course. Everyone is. Even if you don't know the bride or groom, it's a social obligation, like attending a modern office party, except with less small talk and more roasted turnips. You shuffle home thinking about the upcoming wedding, imagining what medieval dancing looks like, probably loud, mostly hopping, and whether your one tunic will be acceptable. You briefly consider fashioning a new belt out of twine. Chic. Back in your hut, you light a candle stub, its weak flame throwing large, twitchy shadows across the walls. You lie down, stare at the ceiling, and let the events of the day wash over you like tepid rain. The tax is paid for now. The fields are ready for now. A wedding is coming with turnips. And you've survived yet another deeply inconvenient, physically exhausting, weirdly satisfying day in medieval times. The wedding is today. You wake up to a different kind of buzz in the village, less doom, more cheer. Children are chasing each other through mud puddles. Someone is stringing bits of cloth and dried flowers between huts, and you're pretty sure you hear a goat bleating in tune with a flute. It's like medieval Pinterest exploded out of nowhere. You splash your face with cold water, attempt to tame your hair using nothing but determination and spit, and pull on your finest tunic. By finest, of course, we mean least patched and only smells faintly of soup. The village green has been cleared. Long tables are being set with loaves of bread, chunks of white cheese, boiled eggs, and jugs of ale already sweating in the shade. It's all terribly rustic and slightly charming if you ignore the swarm of flies fighting over the cheese. You spot the bride, wearing a wreath of woven herbs and flowers, her dress simple but clean. She looks nervous in the way that says she's unsure if she's marrying a man or just as sheep dowry. The groom looks equally nervous, but he keeps adjusting his belt like that's going to solve anything. Mainstream historical fact, medieval marriages were often arranged and more about land, livestock, and alliances than love. Consent mattered, but mostly in the legal sense, and sometimes it was more assumed than explicitly given. The priest begins the ceremony. He's old, a little wobbly, and smells faintly of beeswax and onions. His voice creaks through Latin phrases which no one understands but everyone nods to like it's a very serious TED Talk. The couple exchanges vows, rings of twisted grass, and awkward glances. Then, with a cheer and an improvised trumpet blast from a hollowed horn, they're declared married. A cheer erupts, and suddenly you're pulled toward the tables. Food is being passed, drinks are flowing, and someone's aunt has already had too much mead and is doing a suspiciously good jig. You're handed a meat pie, hot, flaky, suspiciously lumpy, and you take a bite, hoping for pork but ready for squirrel. Sir Gruncelot joins the festivities by stealing half a loaf of bread and trotting off victoriously. No one stops him. In fact, someone claps. You sit with a group of villagers, swapping stories, laughing over spilled cider, and listening to an old man retell the same tale about catching a fish this big every year since before you were born. It's nonsense, but it's tradition. Everyone plays along. Quirky tidbit, at some weddings, guests would toss grain or small coins at the bride and groom for luck. In this case, someone throws a chicken feather which lands squarely in the groom's hair and stays there like a proud little flag. No one mentions it. The dancing begins, and you are absolutely dragged into it. You link arms with a stranger, spin in a dizzy circle, and try not to step on any children or chickens. The music is lively, played on fiddles, flutes, and the occasional off-key singing voice. There's clapping, stomping, and laughter, the good, belly-deep kind. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers danced primarily for celebration or for religious ritual. Frankly, watching your neighbors twist and hop around a hay bale while holding mugs in their teeth doesn't seem particularly holy, but hey, who are you to judge? As the sun begins to set, the celebration continues. Someone starts roasting something over a fire, possibly a pig, possibly a very large dog-shaped turnip. You can't tell, but it smells incredible. The sky turns gold and peach and finally deep blue, a soft medieval gradient fading into the hum of insects and the clink of tankards. Eventually, you find yourself lying in the grass, looking up at a sky littered with stars. The sounds of music and chatter drift around you. Someone nearby is softly humming. A child is asleep beside her mother on a bundle of hay, the mother's foot gently rocking the pile in rhythm. You let out a slow breath. Despite the lack of plumbing, the ever-present mud, and the very real chance of food poisoning, this moment is good. It's not flashy or glamorous, but it's sincere. Everything in medieval life may be borrowed, patched, or slightly moldy, but this joy? It's real. You remember the tax collector, the thatched roof you helped fix, the hours in the fields, and realize that these little wins, a wedding, a song, a stolen piece of bread, are the counterbalance. And just as you start to doze off under the stars, someone drunkenly stumbles over your legs, spills a bit of ale on your tunic, and slurs, you dance like a startled goat. You smile. Because honestly, you'll take that as a compliment. The wedding haze lingers in the village air the next morning, thick as chimney smoke and twice as sleepy. You wake with a faint headache and a sprig of rosemary tangled in your hair, an unasked souvenir from last night's dancing. Around you, the village stirs slowly. People are moving like they've been flattened by a cart full of bricks. You step outside to find someone already sweeping the square, and the groom, now visibly more tired than festive, is trying to shoo goats away from yesterday's leftover bread. The goats look smug. One is wearing a flower crown. Today, however, is not a day for lounging. It's market day. The village market isn't huge, just a few stalls on wooden carts, a patch of open ground, and a whole lot of shouting. But it's still the event of the week. People from surrounding villages arrive on foot, on donkeys, and in the rare wooden cart, all pulling along sacks, baskets, and at least one suspiciously angry chicken. You grab your satchel, a few things to barter, and head down. Mainstream historical fact, medieval markets were critical social and economic hubs. Villagers relied on them not only for goods they couldn't produce themselves, like salt, spices, or metal tools, but also for news, gossip, and that weird cheese only old man Garrel sells. At the market, everything is slightly overwhelming. It smells like herbs, fish, and feet. A woman shouts about her wool, another sings to advertise her honey cakes. Children dart between legs, and somewhere a lute plays a tune that's only mildly out of tune. You dodge a runaway piglet and find yourself in front of a stall selling combs made of horn. You trade a carved spoon, your last one, for a linen cloth. It's thin, a little scratchy, but it has a green pattern that looks vaguely like leaves or possibly angry worms. Either way, it's an upgrade. You browse stalls, taste an apple, sour, sample some mead, strong, and consider whether buying a second-hand pair of shoes is a smart investment or an invitation for fleas. Probably both. Quirky tidbit, some medieval markets issued their own tokens instead of coins, especially in remote areas. They worked like store credit and were often made of wood, bone, or lead. You're handed one shaped like a tiny duck and told, good for bread next week. You nod, smile, and tuck your tiny duck token into your belt pouch like a medieval gift card. Then there's the entertainment. A juggler performs in the center, tossing apples, rocks, and one very nervous-looking mouse into the air. A storyteller recites tales of knights and dragons with such enthusiasm you start to believe his wooden sword might actually slay something. Children gather to see a man with a trained raven that bows on command. The raven also swears in Latin, which causes one priest to drop his bread in horror and flee the scene. Everyone else applauds. Historians still argue whether markets leaned more toward commerce or performance. Many functioned like open-air theaters as much as trading posts, some even featured traveling troupes, acrobats, and puppet shows with political satire. Medieval Saturday Night Live minus the Wi-Fi. While watching the juggler, someone tugs your sleeve. It's the village reeve, looking harried. He says a messenger has arrived from the castle. That gets your attention faster than spoiled fish. You follow him to the tavern where a young man in livery sits at a table, clearly proud of his feathered cap. He stands when you enter and unfurls a parchment. There's to be a tax reassessment. Of course. Also, the lord requests 2 strong villagers to assist with repairs on the manor's outer wall. Volunteers will be handsomely compensated, which you know translates to, you'll get soup and maybe a nod. The reeve turns to you with that look part hopeful, part apologetic. And somehow, yes, you agree. Because you're curious. Or generous. Or just really, really bad at saying no. You're to leave at dawn. The rest of the day passes in a quiet blur. You help an old woman carry her grain sacks. You lend a hand to a neighbor mending a fence, even though the hammer you're using is more rust than metal. You eat dinner, mostly boiled leeks and a questionable sausage, and sit for a while staring at the fire. Sir Gruntsalot snuffles at your feet, his tail thudding lazily. You scratch behind his ears, and he lets out a grunt so soulful, it's practically a poem. You pack your satchel. One cloth, your new belt of twine, a crust of bread, and the tiny duck token. Because why not? Before bed, you sit outside a while. The stars are thick and close to night, like someone spilled salt on black velvet. You imagine what the manor will be like. Bigger walls, better bread, more chickens, maybe even a bath, though you won't get your hopes up. You shiver slightly, not from cold, but from the sense that life just keeps moving here. There's always something to do, somewhere to go, even if it's just a cart ride away. Time is a slow tide, pushing everyone forward in muddy boots and calloused hands. You stand, stretch, and head inside. Tomorrow you're going to the manor, but tonight, you're still in your little hut, curled beneath a blanket that smells of hay and smoke, listening to the wind whisper secrets through the cracks in the walls. The manor looms in the misty gray of morning. You've been walking since dawn, past dew-wet fields and groggy cows, your satchel thumping rhythmically against your hip. The sun's barely awake, and frankly, neither are you. But the silhouette of the manor begins to take shape through the fog. Bigger than you imagined, but not quite the grand castle you'd envisioned as a child. It's more functional. Stone walls, narrow windows, a wooden gate streaked with rain and bird gifts. You half expect a trumpet to sound as you approach, but instead you get a grumpy gatekeeper with impressive nose hair and a grunt that might mean welcome or go away. Mainstream historical fact: manorial estates were the heartbeat of rural feudal life, more than just fancy houses. They managed vast lands and functioned as economic centers. Lords ran the estate while peasants worked its fields, and specialists, like blacksmiths or millers, kept the whole thing chugging along. You're shown inside by a boy with straw-colored hair and the enthusiasm of an underfed squirrel. He leads you to the outer wall, where several workers are already hoisting stones, patching gaps, and trying not to fall into the moat. The air smells like damp limestone and effort. Your job? Carry rocks from the pile to the wall. That's it. All day. Rocks. You get to it, lugging, lifting, stacking, until your shoulders ache and your hands feel like sandpaper dipped in regret. Someone hands you a ladle of onion broth around midday, and it's the best thing you've ever tasted. By afternoon, the sun finally breaks through, turning the manor yard into a buzz of activity. Chickens peck near the stables. A group of boys chase each other with sticks, and a laundress beats clothes against a wooden board with a rhythm you could dance to if your legs hadn't just turned to boiled noodles. You take a moment to sit near the well. The stone is cool under your thighs, and you eavesdrop on a conversation between two kitchen workers. Apparently, there's drama. Quirky tidbit. Manor kitchens were hotbeds of gossip, and not just because of the fire. With the Lord, his family, guests, and staff all under one roof, there were plenty of secrets to swap between stews. One maid claims she saw the Lord's niece sneaking out last night wearing boots covered in hay. Scandalous. Suddenly, someone calls your name. You blink. How do they know your name? A steward, dressed slightly better than everyone else and walking like he owns at least 2 pairs of shoes, wants to speak with you. You follow, brushing dirt off your tunic and trying to look like a responsible adult. The steward asks questions. Where are you from? How long have you worked in the village? Can you read? You can't, but you squint hard like you're deep in thought. He tells you the manor needs more than just rock carriers. They're looking for someone to help in the stable, keep watch at the gate, maybe even assist the clerk. He raises an eyebrow, as if measuring your worth by how little chicken poop is on your boots. Historians still argue whether upward mobility was truly possible for peasants. Technically, yes, especially in times of war, plague, or vacancy. but most stayed right where they were. Still, every so often someone got lucky, or just showed up at the right time when everyone else was off dying from something. The steward tells you to think it over. You return to the wall, but your mind's already elsewhere. Life at the manor wouldn't exactly be luxurious. You're not about to be knighted or given a wing of the house, but it would be different. Maybe safer. Maybe warmer in winter. Maybe with slightly less mud. As the sun dips low, work winds down. You help stack tools, rinse your arms in the trough, and sneak an apple from a cart when no one's looking. You've earned it. Back in the makeshift bunkhouse, a creaky wooden building that smells like old straw and ambition, you settle in among the other workers. A few snores are already building into a chorus. Someone's playing a soft tune on a carved flute, and it blends with the night breeze in the kind of way that makes you pause and smile without knowing why. Sir Gruntsalot didn't come on this trip. You miss the comforting weight of him against your legs. There's a dog here, sure, but it's more bark than brains and has tried to eat your shoelaces twice. Still, as you lie back and stare at the shadowed ceiling beams, you feel something. Not pride exactly, but maybe a whisper of it. You didn't die today. You worked hard. You earned your bread. And someone somewhere in this big clunky feudal puzzle noticed. Maybe tomorrow you'll say yes to the steward. Or maybe you'll go back to your hut, your goat, your mud-choked routine. Either way, you close your eyes knowing you've seen a bigger piece of this medieval world and live to tell about it. Just don't dream of hauling rocks. Your back might rebel. You wake to the creak of wood and the sharp chorus of morning chickens. Not roosters, mind you, but chickens, arguing in the yard like they're unionizing. Your body protests every movement. Muscles you didn't even know you had are filing complaints with the medieval HR department. You sit up anyway. The manor is already stirring. A young boy is chasing a goose. A maid is hauling a bucket of soapy water. And someone somewhere is banging pots together with enough force to wake the dead. You toss off your blanket, stretch with a groan that sounds like a dying bagpipe, and head outside. Today, you're supposed to answer the steward. You find him near the granary, counting sacks of barley with the solemnity of a man deeply suspicious of math. When he sees you, he lifts his chin and asks, "Well," you hesitate. Life at the manor would mean more rules, more eyes on you, more people to disappoint if you fall on your face. But it could also mean food security, maybe even boots without holes one day. You nod. He grunts, a sound that may or may not mean welcome to the team, and motions for you to follow. Just like that, your life takes a pivot. Mainstream historical fact. Becoming part of a lord's manor staff wasn't uncommon for able-bodied peasants. Manor households were like medieval businesses, requiring cooks, grooms, scribes, guards, and more. For those looking to escape pure agricultural drudgery, it was one of the few options available, if you could stomach the politics and the pecking order. You're shown to your new duties. For today, stable hand. The stables are aromatic. The combination of hay, horse, and fermented something assaults your nostrils with medieval gusto. A groom named Alan, who's missing 2 teeth and has a fondness for singing to the horses, hands you a pitchfork and a broom. You clean. You brush. You don't let Lady Marjorie's mare eat your fingers. Got it. The work is messy, repetitive, and surprisingly therapeutic. You muck out stalls, refill feed bins, and learn the hard way that standing behind a horse is an excellent way to test your reflexes. Alan shows you how to brush a horse's coat without annoying it, and after a while, one of the geldings seems to take a liking to you. You name him Turnip. During lunch, you eat near the kitchen hearth porridge, a slab of cheese, and something that might be meat or a very ambitious mushroom. A scullery maid slides next to you, whispers that the clerk is looking for someone who can make letters. When you say you can't read, she shrugs. Doesn't matter. He's losing his eyesight. He just needs someone who can copy what he says. You've got steady hands, don't you? You flex your pitchfork fingers and try to look literate. Quirky tidbit. Illiteracy was widespread among medieval peasants, but that didn't stop people from participating in bureaucratic life. Many clerks used pictograms, memory tricks, or simply dictated to others. There are recorded instances of peasant women running ale accounts entirely by marking jugs with slashes and dots. After lunch, you stop by the manor's scriptorium, a fancy word for a dim room with a desk, a candle, and more ink than sense. The clerk peers at you through foggy spectacles and gestures toward a stool. He dictates slowly, pausing every few words, and you scratch them onto the parchment like a child drawing ants. It's laborious, ink stains your fingers, and he corrects your Fs 5 times. But by the end of the hour, he seems pleased. Historians still argue whether medieval society allowed for meaningful skill acquisition among peasants. While formal education was rare, exposure to practical skills like animal husbandry, brewing, or even basic clerical tasks was surprisingly common in manor life. You could accidentally pick up an entire trade if you stood still long enough. The steward hears about your impromptu scribal session and decides to keep you on flex. You'll split your time between stable work and helping the clerk. Congratulations, you now have 2 jobs and 1 back. As the sun begins its lazy descent, you're told you'll be attending the evening hall meal, not as a guest, of course, but to help serve. You wash up in a trough, tie your tunic with a cord to look slightly less like someone who rolled in hay, you did, and step into the manor's great hall. It's lit by smoky torches, hung with threadbare banners, and filled with the low murmur of nobles and house staff pretending not to be annoyed by each other. You serve bread, pour watered-down wine, and try not to trip on anyone's train. The Lord himself nods at you once, which is the medieval equivalent of a high five. You overhear talk of taxes, land disputes, and someone's missing pig. The pig discussion gets heated. A minor knight accuses his neighbor of porcine thievery, and a steward has to separate them with a well-placed spoon. You begin to realize that life here isn't necessarily less chaotic than the village, just differently chaotic. There are still egos, messes, and daily dramas. But there's also rhythm, predictability, and an almost ritual-like comfort to the work. Later, you return to your bunkhouse. Someone has placed a half-eaten apple on your bed, whether it's a gift or a warning, you're unsure. You eat it anyway. Turnip the horse would approve. You lie back, listening to the wind brush against the thatch roof and the distant hoot of an owl. Your hands are sore. Your knees ache. But somewhere inside you there's a strange contentment. Like you've started figuring out how to live in this world, not just survive it. You think of your goat, your neighbors, your mud-splattered garden. Part of you misses it. Another part wonders how long you'll stay here and what this place might make of you. Sleep pulls at you gently. No resistance tonight. Just the promise of another long, muddy, meaningful day. You wake before sunrise, not because someone yells or shakes you, but because your body has apparently accepted this new medieval rhythm. Your eyes crack open to pale blue light creeping through the shutter slats, the faint crackle of a nearby hearth, and a symphony of joint complaints as you sit up. There's no pillow, no mattress, no soft chime from your phone, just a straw-filled sack beneath your head and the occasional mouse patrol across the floor. Welcome to the dawn of another manor day. You splash cold water on your face from a wooden basin, inhale a breath that smells of old timber and hearth smoke, and tug your tunic straight. Your shift today starts at the kitchen, lucky you. The manor kitchen is already in chaos. It's not so much organized labor as it is culinary triage. A cook with arms like loaves of bread barks orders while waving a ladle like a weapon. You dodge a flying turnip, narrowly avoid colliding with a girl hauling a cauldron, and somehow end up with a bundle of leeks and the command to slice, not murder. Mainstream historical fact: in large manors, kitchens could be intense, high-pressure places. Feeding dozens, sometimes hundreds, meant coordinating multiple hearths, ovens, and staff. Cooking was often gendered labor, but roles could shift based on status or emergency needs. You chop, stir, fetch, and burn yourself slightly. It's all very glamorous. By mid-morning, you've earned a few grunts of approval and one actual word from the cook, decent. You're practically Michelin-starred by medieval standards. Then comes the garden detail. The manor garden isn't decorative, it's medicinal. You're handed a worn linen pouch and told to harvest comfrey, sage, and feverfew. You nod as if you've always known what those are and wander into a world of greenery. A kindly older woman named Mabel finds you sniffing a weed and trying to decide if it's feverfew or just something that wants to kill you. She teaches you which leaves to pick, how to tie them into bunches, and which herbs to avoid unless you're trying to evacuate your entire digestive system. Quirky tidbit: medieval medicinal gardens often included strange items like mandrake, believed to scream when pulled, leeks for warding off plague, and even nettles for punishment. Yes, stinging nettles were sometimes used in folk remedies for joint pain, rubbed directly onto the skin to stimulate blood flow. You decide not to volunteer for that one. After lunch, barley stew and dry bread, again, you're given something entirely different. You're told to attend the visiting friar. The friar sits in the manor chapel, a small, drafty space that smells of beeswax and stone. He's hunched over a psalter, whispering Latin with a rhythm you find vaguely hypnotic. When he looks up, he smiles like he already knows you stole a handful of raisins earlier. I need a helper, he says, tapping the bench beside him. Someone who listens well. You sit. You listen. He talks. He tells you of the saints, of demons in the woods, of the way sin can cling to a man like soot. He tells you of the stars, the heavens, and a world beyond this one, though most of it sounds suspiciously like a poetic way of saying, don't steal and wash your hands. Then he tells you a story. Do you know about the green children? You shake your head, which encourages him greatly. They came from under the ground, they said. Skin green as grass, eyes wide as moons. Found near a village called Woolpit. Spoke no known language. One of them died. The other survived, learned English, became a servant. Claimed they came from a land without sun. You blink. Either that's a children's tale or the medieval version of an alien encounter. Historians still argue whether the legend of the green children has a basis in fact, perhaps as a misremembered account of foreign orphans, a disease like chlorosis, or folklore spun wildly out of control. Still, the story lingered in England for centuries. The friar smiles, closes his book, and tells you that stories, whether true or not, are how people remember. How they survive. How they teach. You leave the chapel with your brain spinning like a Catherine wheel. That night, back in the bunkhouse, the others are trading stories. One man swears he once saw a rooster breathe fire. Another insists his grandmother cured snakebite by screaming at the wound. Someone claims to have seen a witch vanish in the smoke of a chimney. You toss your straw mattress and listen. Maybe none of it is real. Or maybe, in a world lit only by fire, anything seems possible. You look up at the wooden beams above and imagine the green children wandering in moonlight, their skin glowing faintly in the dark. You imagine stars with names you've never heard and saints who still walk these fields when no one is watching. And then you imagine tomorrow. More chopping, more mucking, more herbs and friars and people whose lives are written on parchment you're just beginning to read. Sleep comes slowly but completely, like a soft wool cloak pulled gently over your body. You dream of turnips and Latin, of strange green faces and crackling fires, and of a world where even the smallest life can hum with quiet magic. You're up before the roosters. Again. You yawn so hard your jaw cracks, then immediately regret it because medieval pillows are not ergonomic and something in your neck now clicks every time you look left. But there's no time to dwell on spinal regrets. Today, you're being sent to the fields specifically to assist the reeve. That's the manor's appointed manager of sorts. Think assistant boss with a really large stick and zero patience for daydreamers. You step into your boots, still damp from yesterday, and join the stream of half-awake workers trudging toward the fields. It's barely light, and already your breath forms little clouds. The grass glitters with dew, and the only sound is the soft thud of feet on dirt and the distant bleating of sheep with boundary issues. The reeve eyes you like you're either lazy or cursed, then hands you a long wooden rake. Don't be clever, he grunts. Just keep pace. You're placed on hay duty. Mainstream historical fact. Hay was essential for feeding animals through the winter, so cutting, drying, and storing it was serious business. Peasants used scythes to mow it and rakes to gather it into rows before stacking it in large thatched hayricks. Everyone helped, from children to elders. No one escaped hay season. You're working alongside a boy named Tom who has a permanent smear of mud across his cheek and an uncanny ability to talk nonstop while working. He explains the entire social pecking order of the manor while also teaching you the most efficient raking technique. Long, wide strokes, back straight, don't fight the wind. Also, mind the frogs. They bite sometimes. You hope that's a joke. It isn't. The sun climbs higher, the hay gets scratchier, and your arms begin to hum with exhaustion. The air smells like grass and dirt and sweat. Honest smells, but not particularly pleasant. At one point, a woman collapses nearby, overcome by heat. Everyone stops for a moment, then resumes. She's fine. Probably. Someone gives her water. Someone else takes her place. The work doesn't pause for long. The reeve inspects the lines of raked hay. He points to yours. Not bad for someone soft. That's high praise. Quirky tidbit. To pass the time and avoid losing their minds in repetitive labor, workers in the fields would often sing work songs. These weren't tuneful ballads. They were rhythmic chants, often a bit bawdy, designed to keep people moving in sync. You hear a few today, mostly about ale and sore feet. One contains the phrase, "Blessed be the cabbage," which you assume is metaphorical. You hope it's metaphorical. Lunch is bread. Again. With onion and a suspicious chunk of hard cheese that tastes like chalk and sadness. You find a spot beneath an ancient tree and watch as oxen plod past, pulling carts stacked with hay. A man sits beside you. He introduces himself as Edwin and pulls from his satchel a small, carved wooden object. Something like a cube with tiny markings. You ask what it is. Game, he says. For luck. Toss it. You toss the cube. It lands on a mark shaped like a spiral. Edwin nods solemnly. Means you'll marry a miller's daughter and grow fat on pies. You laugh and he doesn't. Apparently, this is serious business. Historians still argue whether such carved objects were for divination, idle games, or merely toys, but they've been found in digs across Europe. Some believe they were used for fortune-telling, others think they were just for passing the time during long, backbreaking labor. In a world where nothing came easy, even the illusion of luck had its comforts. You return to the fields. More raking, more blisters. A beetle the size of your thumb tries to take up residence in your tunic, and you're too tired to argue. Then it happens. Clouds roll in like a slow drumbeat, a deep rumble of thunder. People start to work faster. Hay must be dry to store properly, and rain ruins everything. The reeve barks like a wolfhound. You rake faster, pile higher, move like someone who understands that wet hay means animals starve and that starving animals mean hungry winters. When the rain comes, it's mercifully soft, just a drizzle, but the sky darkens quickly. You rush to help cover the hay with tarps made of coarse fabric and tied down with ropes. Everyone works in silence now, the rhythm frantic, the stakes real. By the time the rain stops, you're soaked, your hands are raw, and you smell like a compost bin with ambition. But the hay is mostly protected. Mostly. You expect to be dismissed, but the reeve has other ideas. He sends you to the tool shed. It's not really a shed. It's more like a sagging wooden lean-to that houses an army of sharp, rusted implements. You're told to clean them. You spend the next hour wiping blades with a cloth soaked in oil and muttering to yourself. Every tool seems designed to injure you out of spite. You marvel at how much of this era revolves around not dying, from blisters turning to infection, to scythe blades that could slice a toe clean off. As the sky turns gold with late afternoon sun, you're finally released. You limp back toward the bunkhouse. Your body feels like someone else's. Your hands won't fully unclench. Every breath tastes like grass. But something strange has happened. You start to feel capable. You didn't die in the fields. You didn't pass out or fall into a herrick or get bitten by that one suspicious frog. You earned a nod from the reeve. You learned a game. You raked hay like a local. And as you lie back on your scratchy straw mattress and stare at the ceiling beam, you begin to hum one of the songs from earlier, the cabbage one. Maybe it's a real song. Maybe it's just exhaustion. Either way, you drift off, humming and aching and full of just enough pride to keep the soreness company. You wake up thinking it's Sunday. It's not. In fact, the very concept of weekend hasn't been invented yet. And day of rest only applies if you're a bishop or already dead. Your limbs beg you to lie down forever, but your stomach votes for breakfast, dry bread and yesterday's onion. So you roll out of bed and wince dramatically like the martyr you've become. Today, you've been assigned to help in the manor's dovecot. Yes, pigeons. The reeve says it like it's a punishment. But when you arrive, you're greeted not by some grim feather-covered horror, but by silence. Peaceful, glorious silence. The dovecot is a circular stone building with dozens of small holes in its inner walls, each one a home for a plump, mildly judgmental bird. The air smells of hay, feathers, and, a fair amount of poop. But it's tolerable. After yesterday's field work, this feels like a spa day. Mainstream historical fact. Dovecots were used in manorial estates to raise pigeons for meat, eggs, and fertilizer. Only lords were typically allowed to maintain large dovecots. It was considered a sign of wealth and status. For peasants, poaching from a dovecot could earn brutal punishment, sometimes as severe as mutilation. You meet the pigeon keeper, a stooped man with a nose like a beak and the personality of a soggy root vegetable. He grunts instructions and hands you a woven basket. Eggs. Gently. Climbing the ladder, You peer into the small alcoves. Some pigeons coo softly. Others glare at you like bouncers at an exclusive tavern. You quickly learn which nests are occupied and which are just filled with fluff and pigeon attitude. At one point, you reach in too confidently and get pecked. Hard. The pigeon keeper laughs like a kettle boiling over. First time, eh? You don't reply. You're busy applying a spit-powered disinfectant to your finger, which definitely won't help. Quirky tidbit. In medieval medicine, pigeon dung was actually considered useful. It was mixed with vinegar and used to treat baldness, or applied warm to the stomach to relieve colic. You decide not to try either remedy, though the baldness one does give you pause. By midday, you've collected a respectable number of eggs. Some cracked, some pristine, and managed not to fall off the ladder or start a bird riot. Lunch is soup today or something approximating it. Broth with floating bits of cabbage and what might have been pork 3 days ago. You eat fast, then get summoned again. This time, it's the mill. You're skeptical. If medieval life has taught you anything, it's that new tasks are usually awful. But when you arrive, you're surprised to find the mill humming with activity. There's a giant wooden wheel spinning slowly as water rushes beneath it, powering a series of gears and grinding stones. You can feel the whole structure breathing, like a living thing with wooden lungs and stone teeth. The miller, a ruddy-faced woman named Brunna, gestures for you to carry sacks of grain from the wagon to the grinder. They're heavy, she warns. Don't drop M or the rats will bless your dreams. The sacks are very heavy. Each one feels like it contains bricks, guilt, and the ghost of every bad decision you've ever made. You wobble with your first load, nearly slip, then find your rhythm. Step, step, brace, dump. Brunna nods approvingly. Not bad. You've got a mule's back. You choose to take that as a compliment. Mainstream historical fact, mills were essential in manorial life, used to grind grain into flour. Peasants were often required to use the lord's mill and pay a portion of their grain as a fee. This made millers deeply unpopular. In some stories and folk songs, millers were portrayed as greedy cheats, but also cunning, necessary members of society. You watch as the millstones grind the wheat into a soft, dusty powder. The smell of fresh flour is oddly comforting, like warmth and patience. Brunna gives you a little tour, explaining how the gears must stay greased with animal fat, how the water flow must be adjusted with care, and how she once saw a man lose 2 fingers trying to unjam the chute. You stare at the chute. She grins. Still want to work here? You grin back. I'll stick with pigeons. By late afternoon, you're dismissed. You pass workers tending sheep, children collecting kindling, and a minstrel tuning a harp under a tree, likely hoping the manor lord is in the mood to be serenaded. You wonder what it would be like to live like him, traveling, singing, telling stories for coin. Then again, you saw a minstrel earlier that week nearly get stoned for playing a bawdy song about the Reeves' bald spot, so maybe not. As you approach the bunkhouse, someone stops you. It's Mabel, the herb woman. I've something for your hands, she says, and presses a little cloth bundle into your palm. Inside is a salve of beeswax and comfrey, cool, fragrant, and gentle. Thank you, you whisper. She nods. You've lasted longer than most. You didn't realize that was a thing to be proud of. You go to bed sore, yes, but a little more capable, a little more confident. And as you lie there in the dark, staring at the beams, you think about how much of this life isn't about glory or romance, but about survival, rhythm, and the soft moments in between. And pigeons. Definitely pigeons. You wake to shouting. Not angry shouting, excited shouting. Which is worse? You shuffle outside, still half asleep, to find a crowd forming in the village square. A dusty cart has arrived, pulled by a mule with the personality of a bag of bricks and the stamina of a hero. On it is a man wearing robes far too bright for someone in a place where brown is the reigning color. He claps his hands. Gather round. Gather round. A miracle of medicine awaits. Ah, a traveling physician. You lean against a fence, arms crossed, already bracing for the madness. These pop-up healers, part doctor, part showman, roll through towns promising everything from wart removal to eternal youth. Spoiler, they deliver neither. Mainstream historical fact, in medieval times, many self-proclaimed physicians traveled from village to village, selling cures and tonics. While some were trained in basic humoral theory, others peddled snake oil and charged for prayers, charms, or downright dangerous treatments. This guy is definitely the second type. He holds up a flask. This here is elixir of toad bile, rosemary, and dragon's blood. He pauses for dramatic effect. It cures melancholy, bad luck, and spousal disobedience. You raise an eyebrow. Bold claims for a potion that smells like expired soup. Still, people crowd in, trading coins and eggs for vials of cure. One man drinks it on the spot and promptly hiccups so violently his hat falls off. The crowd cheers. A woman next to you sighs, he's got flair though. Better than the barber surgeon last month. You shudder. That guy pulled a molar with pliers heated in a fire. You can still hear the screaming. Historians still argue whether these traveling doctors helped spread basic medical knowledge or simply prolonged suffering with folk remedies and false hope. You approach the cart curious. The physician offers you a small sachet wrapped in cloth. Wart root. Good for boils, curses, and romantic failure. You blink. All at once. He winks. You never know. Quirky tidbit, some medieval remedies truly bordered on magical thinking. Mouse paste, for example, was recommended for earaches, yes, actual mashed mouse. For nosebleeds, they'd sometimes stuff dried frog into a nostril. You clutch your face protectively just thinking about it. Later that day, as you're finishing up cleaning the animal pens because glamour never rests, you spot the same physician sitting with the manor cook flirting over a bowl of pottage. You suspect he's staying the night. Good luck to him. Meanwhile, you're summoned again by the reeve. This time, he's holding a parchment. You'll be escorting the Lord's wool to the market fair. Your brain hiccups. Like, outside the village? He nods. Tomorrow. Wear shoes. This is momentous. You've barely left the manor grounds, let alone traveled with cargo. Suddenly you feel important. Trusted. Also terrified. Highwaymen, wild dogs, and overzealous monks immediately flash through your mind. You spend the night packing, a crust of bread, a hunk of cheese, a pebble, for no reason, and a dried flower someone gave you weeks ago. You lace your rough shoes, well, rags tied with cord, and try to sleep. Spoiler, you don't. Morning brings nerves and mist. You and two others, John the Thatched and Mari the One-Eyed, load the wool onto a handcart. You're warned to guard it with your life. Wool is wealth. Mainstream historical fact. Wool was England's most important export during the medieval period. Lords made enormous profits from sheep farming, and even monasteries became wealthy through wool trade. Markets and fairs were tightly regulated, and theft of wool was considered a serious crime. The road out of the village is unpaved, riddled with stones, and strangely thrilling. You're walking into the wider world, hearing new bird calls, smelling unfamiliar plants, and occasionally sidestepping mystery puddles you decide not to investigate. Mari hums as she walks. Haven't seen the fair in 2 years, she says. Last time, a fire eater set his hair on fire. John laughs. Serves him right for drinking lamp oil. By noon, the road joins a larger one and traffic increases. You pass other carts, some filled with ale, others with sacks of grain. A group of nuns overtakes you on surprisingly fast donkeys. One of them glares at you for no reason. You feel spiritually judged. Eventually, the market comes into view, a bright, chaotic sprawl of tents, banners, and smells. The sound is overwhelming. Shouting vendors, squealing pigs, clanging blacksmiths, and somewhere, a lute being played far too enthusiastically. You park the cart and wait as John negotiates the wool sale. Mari disappears in search of honey cakes. You wander cautiously, marveling at everything, especially the food stalls. Meat pies, roasted nuts, sweet apples glazed in syrup. You splurge 1 copper coin on a meat pie that tastes suspiciously like pigeon. You don't care. It's hot and salty and wonderful. Suddenly, a juggler drops a torch in front of you. People cheer. You applaud, mostly out of fear. Quirky tidbit, some market fairs had licensed fools who were paid to cause harmless mischief, tickling people, shouting absurd prophecies, or pretending to be goats. You spot one such man wearing a chicken on his head and yelling about the moon being jealous of his knees. The wool sells well. The Lord will be pleased. You don't get a bonus, but you do get a pat on the back and a slice of honey cake from Mari. On the journey home, tired and sticky, you feel different. You've seen the outside world, tasted its pies, survived its fools. And somehow that makes you feel a little more real. As you crawl into bed that night, your legs aching from miles of walking, you smile. You didn't get robbed. You didn't lose the wool. You didn't even trip over anything embarrassing. That's a medieval win if there ever was one. You wake to a rooster that sounds like it's mid-existential crisis. That or someone's taught it to yodel. Either way, your eyes open to the pale gray light of another early morning, and your body already feels like it's run a marathon in wooden clogs. Still, today is special. Because today you're going to church. Not by choice. Nobody skips mass in your village. Even if you're ill, you're expected to show up and pray for healing or for forgiveness for being lazy, depending on who you ask. So you trudge across the dewy grass toward the squat stone church. It's the most solid building in the village, aside from the manor house. The bell tolls once, deep and dramatic, and people start to gather, all dressed in their best, which really just means slightly cleaner versions of their usual outfits. Inside, it's cool, dim, and smells like old wax and damp stone. You find your place, not a pew because those are for nobles and clergy, but a patch of floor. You shuffle in next to Mari, the one-eyed and old Edric, who's already nodding off, bless him. Mainstream historical fact, in medieval Europe, especially after the 12th century, attending church was a central part of village life. The local parish wasn't just for Sunday services, it handled baptisms, marriages, burials, and even tax records. Most people couldn't understand the Latin Mass, but the ritual itself offered rhythm and community to their otherwise chaotic lives. The priest enters, robed and solemn. He begins in Latin, his voice echoing through the nave like a chant from another world. You understand none of it, but you're used to that. No one really expects you to. People kneel, cross themselves, murmur prayers. You follow along, mostly in muscle memory, and try not to think about your growling stomach. Suddenly, the priest starts talking about sin. Very dramatically. Everyone looks guilty, which is standard. He rants about the dangers of temptation, ale, gambling, pride, and oddly specific excessive laughter during rainstorms. You side-eye Mari. She's trying not to smirk. Historians still argue whether the medieval church offered more comfort or control. On one hand, it promised hope and salvation. On the other, it dictated everything from sex to supper. Priests could wield enormous power, especially if the Lord wasn't paying attention or was too busy crusading. After the sermon, there's singing. Sort of. Everyone mumbles the same melody, off-key, out of rhythm, and with deeply confused Latin pronunciation. You do your part by humming vaguely in tune and avoiding eye contact with the priest. Then comes confession. The villagers line up, one by one, to whisper sins into the priest's ear. You shuffle forward, rehearsing your script. You took an extra turnip from the communal pile. You thought about punching Jeffrey. You thought about Jeffrey while punching the turnip. The priest raises an eyebrow but mutters something about penance and sends you off with a vague blessing. Outside, people emerge blinking into sunlight as if being forgiven also adjusts your eyes. Some linger, chatting. Others return home immediately. Sunday might be holy, but chickens still need feeding. You stay behind, because it's also feast day. Quirky tidbit, certain Sundays and saints' days in the medieval calendar allowed for community feasts, small, rustic affairs with communal stews, baked flatbreads, and if you were very lucky, a pig roast. These were often the only times a peasant might taste meat outside of special occasions. Today, it's St. Walburga's Day, which means the church has sponsored a stew pot for everyone. You line up with your wooden bowl, trying not to get elbowed by Jeffrey, who has suspiciously sharp elbows for a miller's apprentice. The stew is okay. Mostly beans. Slightly peppery. Possibly containing snail. But it's warm and it's free. Children run around, getting scolded for throwing bread crusts. The reeve makes a toast, which includes the words humble blessings and wheat yields, and you raise your bowl dutifully. Then, for just a moment, there's music. A traveling fiddler plays a short tune and a few people actually dance. Well, sort of hop in place. You don't join in. You're not sure how to hop gracefully, and your last attempt at dancing ended in a torn sleeve and a broken bench. Instead, you find a spot in the grass, lean against the church wall, and look at the sky. It's the kind of blue that medieval painters would crush lapis lazuli to imitate. It smells faintly of ash, flowers, and livestock. A goose honks somewhere behind you with the confidence of royalty. You exhale. Despite the stiffness in your limbs, the mild hunger in your belly, and the general nonsense of your daily life, you feel okay. For once, you're not rushing. You're not hauling wool, dodging that grumpy donkey, or trying to avoid someone's questionable herbal poultice. You're just here. On the grass. Under the sky. Mainstream historical fact, though medieval life was grueling and often short, many peasants found real moments of joy in festivals, feast days, and simple pleasures like music, shared meals, or a rare sunny day. These little escapes helped people survive emotionally, even when physical life was hard. You close your eyes for a second and let the warmth soak into your skin. Don't fall asleep, Mari mutters, sitting down beside you with a second helping of stew. You'll snore and scare the children. You smirk, eyes still closed. Maybe they need scaring. She chuckles, and for the first time in a long while, you both laugh freely. No priests. No penance. No lords demanding we'll wait reports. Just sun and stew. and the faint sound of someone in the distance falling into a pig trough. You decide not to look. Like sitting in the sun with a half-empty bowl of church stew and absolutely no one asking you to dig a ditch. Until someone does. Because peace, like freshly churned butter, never lasts long in a medieval village. It's Mari the one-eyed, looking mildly annoyed and holding a rather distressed goose. She wandered into the tanner's pit, Mari says, gesturing to the goose. We need to wash her before the Lord notices. It's one of his. You groan internally and follow because refusing isn't really an option, especially when it comes to lords and livestock. You carry the goose, who appears to hold a personal grudge against you, to the stream and do your best to rinse off whatever mysterious tanning sludge she managed to roll in. The goose bites you 3 times and hisses in fluent rage. But eventually, she's somewhat clean, and you return to the village with only minor puncture wounds. By now, the feast day stew has been scraped clean, and the fiddler has moved on to playing what can only be described as aggressively hopeful tunes. Someone's aunt is dancing with a broom. You decide it's time to leave. You shuffle past the church, past the reeve mumbling about barley, and past a gaggle of children trying to build a catapult out of firewood and twine. And finally, you return home to your shared hut. Inside, it's quiet. The fire has gone out and the air smells like smoke, sweat, and that one onion someone's been saving for 2 weeks. You collapse onto the straw mat and close your eyes. But sleep? Not yet. Because tonight, the village celebrates with a story circle. Quirky tidbit, storytelling was a vital part of medieval culture. With literacy limited and books expensive, tales were passed orally, from myths and Bible stories to gossip-soaked local legends. Story circles often formed at taverns, in front of hearths, or during festivals. You groan and sit back up. Outside again. You join the others around a small fire pit near the commons. The fire crackles, casting flickers of orange on soot-streaked cheeks and crooked teeth. Children huddle close, wide-eyed. The elderly lean in, eager for distraction. The local bard, bard is generous, begins. Once there was a knight so foolish he rode his horse into a pond thinking it was a dragon's eye. The story goes on from there. There are frogs that talk, nobles who get turned into goats, and a highly questionable bit about a magical cheese wheel that grants wishes. You try not to laugh, but it's comforting. Silly. Familiar. Historians still argue whether medieval oral traditions were reliable conveyors of culture or just glorified gossip with rhymes. But for you here, it doesn't matter. The stories are a glue that binds the village together, one tale at a time. Suddenly, there's a pause. Everyone turns. The bard looks at you. Well? Got one. You freeze. The group waits. Someone coughs. A baby sneezes dramatically. You clear your throat and do your best. You tell a tale you once overheard, a legend of a hidden glen where foxes wear shoes and argue about taxes. You embellish wildly. The children gasp. Mari cackles. The reeve rolls his eyes but listens anyway. And somehow it works. You survive your impromptu bard audition. Someone even hands you half an apple in appreciation. After that, the stories continue long into the night. You listen, eyes heavy, head nodding slightly with the rhythm of voices and firewood popping. By the time you make it back to your mat, the stars are out. No torches tonight, just the moon, wide and bright, casting soft silver over the thatched rooftops and silent fields. You lie down and sigh. Tomorrow will bring more chores. More nonsense. Probably more bites, either goose or flea, it's anyone's guess. But tonight you're safe. Warm. A little tired. And just the right amount of full. You curl into the scratchy blanket and let your eyes slip shut. Not long after, you dream. In it, you're chasing a talking frog through the barley field, and for some reason, it's wearing Jeffrey's hat. You don't question it. Morning again. You're not even surprised when it starts with a loud crash and a curse from outside. Someone's dropped an entire bucket of turnips into the well. You hear a splash, a long silence, and then the muttered phrase, "No one tell the reeve." You roll over with a groan. Your limbs feel like wet rope. But today isn't just any day. Today is market day. You don't exactly shop. You don't have coins jingling in your pocket like a noble at a feast. But market day still matters. It's one of the only times the outside world trickles into your muddy little hamlet like the first drizzle of spring rain. You shuffle out of bed, chew on a piece of cold oat cake, and brush hay out of your hair with your fingers. Then you make your way down the well-worn path toward the village square. There's already a buzz of excitement in the air. A cart from the next village over has arrived, creaking under sacks of barley, bolts of rough-spun wool, and a large, very uninterested pig. A merchant stands proudly beside his cart wearing a hat so pointy it could injure someone. He begins to yell in a sing-song rhythm about the finest needles the side of the river and genuine Italian combs which look suspiciously like bits of bone filed into shape. Mainstream historical fact, medieval market days were crucial to local economies. Villages often had the legal right to host a market once or twice a week, attracting traders, farmers, craftsmen, and even entertainers. This was where peasants could barter, hear news, or simply watch the world roll in on a wooden wheel. You linger near the edge of the crowd eyeing a stall of dyed threads. You don't need thread. But the colors, there's a blue so deep it looks like bottled dusk. You wonder, just for a moment, what it would be like to wear a tunic that color. Then someone elbows you and the dream dissolves. It's Mari again. She's got a basket full of radishes and a very determined look. We're trading, she declares. You're carrying. So you do. You follow her through the tangle of booths, your arms full of increasingly damp vegetables, listening as she haggles with an old man who seems to value onions like their treasure from the Holy Land. Somewhere nearby, a minstrel strums a lute and sings about a wayward knight and an innkeeper's daughter. The melody is sweet if slightly out of tune. You pass a stall with something strange, glassy orbs filled with bright-colored powder. The merchant, seeing your curiosity, smiles like he's trying to sell you a dragon egg. Imported spices, he whispers. From the east. Cinnamon, clove, even pepper. You blink. Pepper? You've only had it once when the priest shared a noble's leftover pie. It made your tongue tingle like a prayer gone wrong. You glance at the price, 4 pennies for a thimble's worth. You don't even have half a penny. So you nod politely and step away, pretending you weren't just briefly transported by dreams of peppery turnips. Quirky tidbit, pepper, cinnamon, and other exotic spices were some of the most valuable goods in medieval Europe. They were often locked in special spice boxes and treated with the reverence usually reserved for relics. A single sack of pepper could be worth more than a cow. You and Mari finish trading. She ends up with onions, you end up with sore arms, and the pig from earlier has somehow escaped and is being chased by 3 children and a very overwhelmed monk. Back near the center of the square, something strange catches your attention. A small platform has been set up. A town crier stands atop it, ringing a bell and unrolling a scroll with unnecessary drama. Hear ye, he bellows. By order of the local lord. Everyone quiets down. He announces a new tax on grain, a higher toll for river crossing, a proclamation about keeping your goats off church steps, and then, oddly specific again, a fine for public yodeling after sunset. The villagers groan in unison. Historians still argue whether medieval taxes were universally crushing or just selectively painful, depending on your status. Lords often levied taxes not just in coin but in grain, labor, and even chickens. Avoiding them was unwise. As the crowd disperses, you stay back and listen to a woman telling a story near the well. She speaks of a village 2 hills over where the chickens lay golden eggs and the people bathe in milk. A child asks, "Is it true?" She winks. True enough for today. You smile, because sometimes stories are the only riches you get to carry home. As the sun begins to dip, casting amber light across the thatched rooftops, you trudge back toward your hut. Your arms ache, your feet are sore, and your cloak smells like onions. But still, market day gave you glimpses. A bit of blue thread, the scent of clove, a song you didn't know you knew. You tuck those things away in your mind like treasures. Tonight, you'll dream of spices, of glowing eggs, maybe even of that blue tunic shimmering in the sunlight like something from a far-off tale. And as your head sinks into the straw, you realize, that's the magic of market day. Even if you didn't buy a thing, you wake before dawn not because of a rooster, but because of the sound of something dripping. It takes a moment to realize it's not raining outside, it's inside. A slow leak from the roof has formed a small puddle near your sleeping mat. You sigh, shift to the drier corner, and try to pretend it's just a gentle brook babbling you awake. But there's no going back to sleep now. Today, you're supposed to help repair the boundary wall. Not the outer castle wall or anything noble like that, just the low, moss-covered stone divider that keeps your village's sheep on one side and your neighbor's extremely judgmental goats on the other. The walk to the worksite is muddy and uphill. You carry a basket of tools that's about half your weight, with a bent spade sticking out like a rusty periscope. As you trudge, the sky grows lighter, a smudge of gray trying its best to be blue. The wall, when you arrive, is somehow worse than you remember. Half collapsed. Mossy. There's a suspicious chicken nesting in the rubble. You're not alone today. Several others are already there. Old Edwin, who somehow never blinks, Lisbeth, who always smells faintly of turnips, and Toma, who may or may not be planning to marry into goat nobility. Hard to tell. Your task is clear: lift stones, reset them, and try not to throw out your back in the process. Mainstream historical fact: dry stone walling was a common building technique in medieval Europe, especially in rural regions. Without mortar, the technique relies on careful stone placement for structural integrity. Done properly, these walls could last centuries and still exist across England, Scotland, and Ireland. You pick up the first stone. It's cold, damp, and heavier than your life decisions. By midday, you've managed to rebuild a section 3 feet wide and 2 feet high. Progress is glacial. Your muscles scream like a choir of angry geese, and someone, probably Toma, keeps accidentally knocking down what you just built. It's around then that the priest shows up. He's holding a scroll and looking dramatically pious. "I bring news," he announces, like he's unveiling sacred scripture. "There's to be a visit." From the bishop. Everyone groans. A bishop's visit is like a medieval audit. You clean everything, act holier than usual, and try not to accidentally blaspheme within earshot. There's always at least one unfortunate soul who sneezes during a blessing and is labeled possessed for a week. Quirky tidbit: bishops often traveled with an entourage and expected to be hosted in style. Their visits could be spiritual, but also expensive for villages which were expected to provide food, wine, accommodations, and maybe a relic or two for show. Lisbeth mutters, "Well, there goes the ale." The priest smiles thinly and leaves. You return to stone lifting, but now with the added pressure of potential divine inspection. Edwin starts stacking stones into the shape of a cross, just in case. You don't have the heart to tell him it looks more like a goose. The sun climbs higher. You break for a quick lunch: dry bread, a sliver of cheese, and an apple that's more bruised than fruit. You sit on the wall's edge and breathe deeply. The air smells of grass, stone, and someone's forgotten fish pie. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were truly overworked or whether seasonal labor left enough downtime. Either way, your arms say overworked and your back agrees. Later in the afternoon, you discover a nest under a collapsed section. Inside, 6 tiny eggs, pale blue with dark speckles. A robin scolds you from a nearby branch. You pause. Rebuild gently around it. Maybe you're not just stacking rocks. Maybe this wall is more than a divider, it's shelter. Protection. Structure. Like everything else in the village, it does more than it lets on. You keep building. Stone by stone. Inch by aching inch. By the time the sun starts to sink, your hands are scratched and caked with dirt. But the wall stands solid, uneven, and a little proud. You head home slowly, arms dragging. The clouds have turned gold and pink like butter melting on hot bread. Back at your hut, you sink into your mat with a groan. There's no grand feast waiting, no applause, no magical cheese. Just warmth and quiet and the gentle knowledge that you helped hold something together. You fall asleep with the rhythm of stone on stone still echoing in your limbs. And maybe, just maybe, you dream of a robin guarding her eggs from a sky full of curious gods. You wake to the smell of ash. Not fresh fire, no, this is old smoke clinging to your clothes, your walls, your hair. The hearth's embers have long since cooled, but the scent still floats like a memory. You sit up, stretch, and notice a sharp twinge in your side. Probably from that rock you stubbornly lifted yesterday. The one you swore wasn't that heavy. Today is a feast day, which sounds more exciting than it is. Feast days happen more often than you'd expect, up to 1/3 of the year in some places. But they're less turkey and pie and more go to church for hours than maybe have extra bread. Still, they're days off from field labor, and that's nothing to sneeze at. Or maybe don't sneeze at all. People are still suspicious about that after last year's harvest blessing. You shuffle outside into a strange calm. The village is quieter than usual except for the low chant of hymns rising from the stone chapel on the hill. You weren't planning on going right away. You were planning on breakfast. But your neighbor Gertha is already walking by in her good shawl, giving you the kind of look that says, "Get to church or I'll send bees." You sigh. You wash your face with cold water from the barrel and try to make your hair lie flat, mostly by bullying it with your hands. Then, barefoot and humble, you climb the hill with the others. Mainstream historical fact: church was the center of village life in medieval Europe. Attendance was often socially enforced, and feast days marked everything from saints' birthdays to harvest blessings. Services were in Latin, which most people didn't understand, but rituals, bells, and pageantry helped them follow along. You find a spot on a hard bench, squished between a snoring shepherd and a woman who hums every hymn half a beat too early. The priest is already mid-sermon, waving his arms like he's conducting lightning. You can't tell if he's blessing or scolding you. Maybe both. You let the words wash over you, focusing instead on the flicker of candles and the stained glass light spilling over the floor like colored milk. Then comes the part everyone's really here for, the procession. Today, they're parading the relic. Supposedly a bone from St. Magnus' left thumb. It's housed in a golden tube and carried like treasure. You once overheard two older men arguing about whether it's actually a chicken bone painted with holy oil, but no one says that out loud now. The priest raises it high and the crowd bows low. Quirky tidbit: relics in the Middle Ages ranged from impressive, a fragment of the true cross, to the absurd, Mary's breast milk or Jesus's baby teeth. Some churches competed over who had the holiest knuckle. It was very serious business. You file out of the chapel later, half blinded by sunlight. There's a gentle buzz in the air, a sense of shared relief, like school just let out early. Someone has started roasting something nearby. A scrawny goat, maybe? Or a very optimistic pigeon. Either way, the smell turns your stomach in a good way. Down in the square, a makeshift feast has begun. Baskets of bread are being passed around, along with small wheels of cheese and maybe a cup of wine if you squint and pray. You find yourself seated next to a tanner with terrible jokes and a young girl who keeps stealing sips of your broth when she thinks you're not looking. You let her. She's got the face of someone who hasn't had a full belly in weeks. Historians still argue whether feast days provided real reprieve for peasants or simply masked the weight of the rest of the year. Certainly, the food was modest by modern standards, but in villages like yours, any variation from barley mush was a celebration. The rest of the day is slow and sunlit. Children chase each other between carts. A juggler tries to impress a pig. Someone starts playing a flute badly, but no one tells him to stop. You lie back on the grass, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. For once, there's no immediate task. No goat escaping. No stone wall to rebuild. Just the warmth of sun on your face and the lingering taste of real butter on bread. And maybe, just maybe, you let yourself drift. Not quite asleep, but not entirely awake either. Somewhere soft in the middle. By dusk, the food is gone, the hymn echoes have faded, and the village settles into a rare kind of peace. You return to your hut with a full belly and tired feet, the scent of incense still faint in your clothes. There's laughter from nearby huts. A lullaby being hummed. The quiet rustle of wind through thatch. You fall asleep easily tonight. Not because of exhaustion, but because for one day life was full. You wake to voices. Not angry ones yet, but tense, rising and falling in short bursts like waves against the shore. Something's going on in the village square. You sit up slowly, rubbing sleep from your eyes, and catch a whiff of something pungent. Not smoke. Not sweat. Something worse. You peek outside. Ah, that explains it. A traveling merchant has arrived. With a cart. And a donkey. And a smell that suggests he bathes about as often as you eat meat. Which is to say, not often. Still, there's excitement. A merchant means news from other towns, strange goods, and maybe, if he's in a generous mood, a bit of gossip juicy enough to chew on for weeks. You wander over and the crowd's already buzzing. The merchant stands atop his cart, his cloak billowing like he thinks he's royalty, and shouts things like silks from the east, and honeyed figs from Spain, and real unicorn horn. You blink. Sure. Mainstream historical fact, medieval markets were central to rural life. Traveling merchants brought goods that villagers couldn't make themselves: metal tools, exotic spices, fabrics, and news. While some wares were indeed foreign, much of what they sold was regional, bartered, or questionably sourced. You squeeze closer and inspect the cart. There's a stack of wool cloaks that smell suspiciously like wet dog, some tarnished trinkets, a cracked mirror, and a pile of glass beads claiming to be dragon tears. You pick one up. It feels like something a child would trade for a better rock. Still, you're tempted. Not because you need anything, but because it's different. Something shiny in a world of gray and brown. You spot something practical: an iron pot, not fancy, but round and unburnt. Yours cracked last winter, and you've been boiling broth in a dented bucket ever since. How much, you ask? 2 hens and a length of linen, he replies, not even blinking. You blink enough for both of you. Quirky tidbit: bartering was the main method of trade in many medieval villages. Coins were rare, especially among peasants, so items were exchanged based on perceived value. Haggling was expected and could last hours. You start bargaining. You offer 1 hen and some firewood. He counters with a hen, a loaf of rye, and a song. You're not sure if he's serious about the song, but you're not about to hum for cookware. Eventually, he agrees to the hen, the firewood, and a promise that your cousin will help him find the best ale in town. You don't tell your cousin. You carry your new pot home like it's treasure. It clangs with each step, a kind of joyful percussion. You'll scrub it tonight and finally cook something without the faint aftertaste of rust. Historians still argue whether these rural markets were essential lifelines or occasional luxuries. For you, it feels like both. In a world that changes slower than molasses in winter, a pot can feel like progress. Later that afternoon, the merchant puts on a show. This consists of juggling 3 apples badly, singing a love ballad in the wrong key, and unveiling what he calls the glass of future sight. It's just the cracked mirror, now dusted with flour. You watch politely. The children clap. The merchant bows like he's just performed for kings. Then, just as quickly, he packs up. He accepts a few more trades, a bundle of onions for Persian perfume, which smells like moldy hay, a woven scarf for salt from the sea. As he pulls away, villagers wave. A few children chase the cart until they're called back. And just like that, the excitement ebbs. You sit on your doorstep, Pop beside you, watching the road until the merchant becomes a speck on the horizon. There's something comforting about his departure. Like a storm that came through, stirred everything up, and left just enough behind to talk about for weeks. You tap the pot. It sounds solid. Real. Tonight, you'll make broth with a little turnip, maybe even an onion. You imagine it already steam rising, scent curling into the corners of your home like a warm hug. The wind picks up, fluttering the edge of your tunic. A dog barks in the distance. A goat sneezes somewhere. You smile. In this small, slow world, it doesn't take much to feel like something's happened. A merchant's visit, a barter one, a pot that doesn't leak. You go to sleep with your fingers still smelling faintly of iron and ash. And in your dreams, you juggle apples perfectly. You wake up to a sound that isn't normal. It's not the clink of milk buckets or the clatter of hooves. It's sharper, metallic, rhythmic, coming from the edge of the village where the trees meet the path. You slip on your rough shoes and creep out, careful not to make the floorboards creak. Outside, the sky is the kind of soft gray that promises rain or at least a day without sunburn. And then you see them. Soldiers. Not many, maybe 8, but enough to turn a sleepy village into a quiet one. They stand tall, their armor catching the dim morning light. Most villagers have stopped what they're doing, watching from doorways or behind carts. A child drops a basket of eggs. No one bothers picking them up. Mainstream historical fact, medieval soldiers, whether knights, men-at-arms, or local militia, often pass through villages either on patrol or en route to another location. Their presence could mean taxes, conscription, or worse, quartering. One of the soldiers calls out in a booming voice, "We require food, horses, and a guide to the next town." The King's Road is under repair, which is ironic because no one remembers the road ever being not under repair. The local reeve, who always walks like he's afraid of offending the dirt, steps forward. He tries to sound official, but the soldiers don't look impressed. One of them yawns. Another pokes the reeve's cloak with the tip of a very expensive-looking sword. It's decided the soldiers will be staying the night. And just like that, the day's plans evaporate. You're assigned to help gather food, which means you, your cousin, and 3 annoyed goats spend the morning collecting whatever edible items can be scraped together. You give up a small wheel of cheese and half your week's bread. The cheese you mourn. The bread, well, you were getting tired of it anyway. Back in the center of town, a couple of soldiers remove their helmets and immediately look more human. One has freckles. Another picks hay from his boots with the precision of a surgeon. One even waves at a child who screams and runs off. You're warned not to ask questions. But of course, you do. You sidle up to one young soldier while pretending to adjust a barrel. "Where are you coming from?" you murmur. He glances around, then shrugs. "Nowhere worth remembering." That's not ominous at all. Quirky tidbit, not all medieval soldiers were battle-hardened warriors. Many were poorly trained locals pressed into service. Their armor was often borrowed, ill-fitting, or pieced together like a rusty jigsaw puzzle. And yes, sometimes they forgot which side of the sword to hold. By midday, a few soldiers are napping under the trees while others flirt awkwardly with the baker's daughter. One of them sharpens a dagger while humming what sounds suspiciously like a lullaby. The village keeps its distance. There's always a tension when armed men are present. They may not be here to harm, but they don't need to be. Their very presence reminds everyone that power wears metal. That evening, there's a fire built in the square. Not a bonfire, just a modest circle of flames surrounded by soldiers and a few brave villagers. You linger at the edge, holding a bowl of watered-down stew. One soldier is telling a story, something about bandits and a runaway pig. People laugh. You can't tell if it's from fear or politeness. The guide they requested is your cousin Hal. He's not thrilled. He knows the forest path is filled with bogs, fox dens, and that one cursed tree that groans when the wind hits it right. But he agrees anyway because saying no to armed men is like saying no to gravity. Historians still argue whether medieval armies were a necessary protective force or an exploitative presence in peasant life. For most villagers, soldiers were both shield and sword, defenders from some, threats to others. By the time you crawl into bed, the village feels off-kilter. like someone moved the walls of the world a few inches to the left. You fall asleep to the sound of clinking metal and the smell of stew gone cold. Tomorrow, the soldiers will be gone, but their absence might echo louder than their visit. Morning comes heavy, not with rain or fog, but with that strange stillness after strangers leave. The kind of quiet where every chicken peck and footstep feels magnified, like the village is inhaling and not sure if it should exhale yet. The soldiers are gone. They left early, before sunrise, taking with them a few sacks of dried apples, one of the village's better goats, and your cousin Hal, looking exceptionally unhappy atop a borrowed mule. No one said goodbye. You stretch your sore limbs and look around. People are already out, moving slower than usual. The baker needs dough with extra aggression. The blacksmith hammers like the anvil insulted him. A few children play, quieter than usual, drawing swords in the dirt and staging battles where no one wins. Mainstream historical fact: military movement through rural areas often disrupted daily life. Though not always hostile, soldiers were known to deplete resources and alter local routines simply by showing up. After they left, villages could take days or weeks to recover. You head to the fields. It's not planting season, not yet, but there's always something to do: pulling weeds, checking fences, swearing at moles. Today's task is mending a portion of collapsed stone wall, and your hands are in for a treat: sharp rocks, cold mud, and a helpful neighbor who mostly supervises. As you work, a traveling friar arrives. Because of course, if it's not soldiers, it's a friar. He's small, wears a robe that's more patched than cloth, and walks with a cheerful limp. He greets everyone like they're cousins and carries a satchel stuffed with holy texts, bread crusts, and what looks suspiciously like a moldy apple. Peace and mended fences, he says, pointing directly at yours. You blink. How did you? He winks. Quirky tidbit: wandering friars were part preacher, part gossip courier. They spread religious messages, yes, but they also shared news, jokes, and the occasional scandal from village to village. Many were beloved. Some were suspected spies. All were considered a break from the norm. The friar offers a blessing. You don't refuse. He says some words in Latin, at least you think they're Latin, and sprinkles water that smells faintly of ale. You decide not to question it. He sets up outside the church, which is really just a glorified shed with one stained glass window and a rooster living in the rafters. People gather. Not for mass, necessarily, but to hear what he has to say. News from the east, he announces, where the river froze so solid that a cow crossed it without realizing. Also, the bishop's mule ran off with a nun. And somewhere near the coast, a fish fell from the sky. No one knows what to make of that last one. He goes on to speak about sin, redemption, and why God might be testing you with ungrateful goats. You nod solemnly, mostly because your goat is ungrateful and possibly demonic. Historians still argue whether the role of friars in medieval life was spiritual guidance or subtle social control. They were often beloved for their humor and storytelling, yet their arrival usually meant you'd be guilt-tripped into giving up your last decent turnip. The friar sings a hymn before he leaves. It's off-key and earnest and surprisingly beautiful in its way. The villagers join in, their voices uneven but full. Even the rooster contributes, late and loudly. Then he's gone, hobbling down the same path the soldiers took, waving his satchel like it might take flight. By dusk, the rhythm of the village has started to settle again. Your cousin hasn't returned, but you've heard whispers he's already bartered the mule for a week of lodging and a jug of something unmentionable. You suspect he'll be fine. You finish repairing the wall. It's not perfectly straight, but it stands. That's something. That night, over watery stew and a sliver of cheese, you reflect on how things can shift so quickly, how visitors come, disrupt, and disappear, leaving your life a few degrees to the left of where it started. You imagine the friar still walking, spinning tales to another village, somewhere far off where cows cross rivers and nuns ride mules into the sunset. You chuckle. The rooster in the rafters clucks in agreement. Another morning, another sound. This time it's laughter. High-pitched, erratic, and definitely not adult. You peek out the window and see children running across the village green, one of them draped in what must be a stolen curtain. They're playing some form of king and fool, except everyone seems to want to be the fool. There's a strange energy in the air, like the village collectively decided, we've survived a military visit, a sermon, and a missing cousin, so now let's be weird. And weird it gets. Today is a festival day. Or something like it. No one's quite sure anymore whether it's tied to a saint, a harvest, or the moon looking a certain way in April. But tradition says it's the day of the goat crown. You don't know what it means either, but it involves one unlucky goat being made king for the day, then pelted with flower petals and escorted through the village like royalty. Mainstream historical fact: Medieval villages often celebrated hyperlocal festivals, many of which blended Christian and pagan traditions. These events served both spiritual and social functions, often giving people brief escapes from the drudgery of daily life. You join the crowd in the square where someone has made a crown of daisies. Your goat, yes, your goat, has been nominated. He looks unimpressed. You attempt to wrangle him into position. He responds by sitting down stubbornly and chewing on the hem of your tunic. The crowd roars with laughter. Someone declares he's already acting like nobility. Eventually, with enough bribery in the form of turnip slices, he rises and begins his procession. Children throw petals. One old man insists on playing a flute despite knowing only one note. Two women argue over whether last year's goat was better behaved. The goat sneezes. The crowd cheers. Quirky tidbit: some medieval villages held mock coronations of animals, goats, pigs, or even cats as part of local festivities. These events were often satirical jabs at nobility veiled as celebration. In some parts of Europe, actual church services were performed with a donkey in place of a priest. Yes, seriously. After the goat procession, there's food, well, festival food. Bread shaped like animals. Spiced apples. Stew that tastes exactly like yesterday's stew but with more hope. Someone roasts chestnuts and someone else tries to juggle them, resulting in mild burns and enthusiastic clapping. The adults sit on benches, laughing more than usual. A few have already dipped into the celebratory mead, which hits fast and hard when you haven't eaten anything since dawn but a boiled radish. You play a round of throw the stone through the hoop, which is less a game and more a lesson in physics and disappointment. Nearby, someone recites a poem about a dragon who only eats pies. You can't decide if it's brilliant or madness. Possibly both. Historians still argue whether festivals like these were rooted in deep seasonal cycles or simply invented for fun and distraction. Either way, they were essential to morale, especially in rural areas where routine and repetition could feel like a slow grind through wet dirt. Later in the day, things shift. A group of traveling performers arrives. It's unclear if they were invited or just smelled the stew. They bring a puppet show, a dancing bear, which is actually a large man in a bear hood, and riddles that make no sense. One performer approaches you directly. She's dressed in bells and ribbons and smells like cinnamon and wet grass. Want to hear your fortune? She asks. You shrug. Why not? She tosses some bones onto a cloth and stares at them like they've just insulted her mother. You'll have an itchy winter, she says solemnly. You nod gravely. I had one last year too. She grins. Then it's tradition. As dusk falls, the goat crown is placed on a haystack, thrown, and ceremoniously set on fire while everyone claps and sings a tune that may or may not involve vegetables dancing. You're not sure anymore. It's been a long day. The goat watches the flames with mild interest, then goes back to chewing grass. By the time night arrives, your belly is full, your head is fuzzy, and your cheeks ache from smiling too much. You lie down in bed and stare at the ceiling where the flickering shadows from the fire dance like old spirits come to tuck you in. You survived another strange day in medieval times. And if this is the weirdest it gets, you might just make it after all. You wake to quiet. Not the suspicious kind like when the pigs escape. No, this is the soft, cozy hush of a village too tired to move quickly. Your body is sore from yesterday's festival chaos. Your goat, freshly decrowned, seems smug about returning to obscurity. The daisy crown, or what's left of it, sits beside your door like a fading memory of temporary royalty. But rest isn't on the agenda today. Word has spread, again, that a nobleman is passing through on his way to inspect the local holdings. Which means prepare the roads, wash your face, and pretend you haven't been living on boiled barley for 3 weeks. Mainstream historical fact: nobles often traveled through their domains to collect rents, deliver justice, or just remind everyone who was in charge. These visits were a mix of political necessity and public theater. For villagers, they meant both dread and spectacle. You're roped into beautifying the edge of the road leading into town. This mostly involves sweeping mud off of other mud and planting 3 sad flowers that immediately get stepped on by a pig. As the noble's entourage approaches, you're ushered back with the others to make space. A horn blows, a single awkward toot. Someone claps too early. And then he arrives. Not gallant, not gleaming, just overdressed. His horse is magnificent, yes, but the man himself looks vaguely sunburned and extremely uninterested in being here. He surveys the village like he's tasting something sour. People bow. Deeply. You do too, mostly because the baker elbowed you. The noble says something about taxes. The scribe nods. The steward writes. The villagers smile through gritted teeth. Then the noble says, let's have the mill inspected. And the crowd audibly groans. Because, of course, the mill hasn't worked properly since a goose flew into the wheel last month. It's still being repaired, sort of, in the same way a child repairs a broken toy by burying it. The procession heads that way and you follow, curious more than anything. Quirky tidbit: medieval nobles often had their own entourage of musicians, jesters, and falconers even on mundane inspection trips. Some would travel with their pet monkeys, parrots, or mini lapdogs, much to the bewilderment of local villagers who had never seen anything like it. This particular noble does not have a monkey. But he does have a jester who mostly looks bored and is juggling apples like it's beneath him. You catch his eye. He shrugs mid-juggle. You shrug back. There's an unspoken solidarity. The mill, as expected, is half-functional. The noble peers at it. Someone explains the goose incident. There's laughter, nervous from the villagers, dry from the noble. He points out a beam. That's rotting. The miller, sweating bullets, nods vigorously. Yes, my lord. That's its spiritual state. The noble does not laugh. He turns his horse and begins to trot away, already done with your entire existence. Historians still argue whether these noble visits strengthened feudal bonds or merely reinforced class divides. They were theatrical, transactional, and typically left a village feeling a mix of awe and exhaustion. Also, they often cost the villagers more than they gained. The inspection ends without arrests or new taxes, so in medieval terms, it's a success. Back in the village, people start talking. That cloak was made of velvet. He smelled like rosemary and horse. Did you see the horse? I think it winked at me. You return to your hut, mentally exhausted from watching everyone pretend for an entire afternoon. You lie down just for a moment. You wake up 3 hours later with straw in your hair and your goat standing on your foot. You sigh, stretch, and make yourself a supper of root mash and cheese rind. Tastes like embarrassment and calories. Outside, the sun begins to sink, staining the sky a sleepy kind of pink. A child runs by pretending to be the noble, holding a stick and shouting, "Taxes!" You there, hand over your turnips. You smile. Another day, another reminder that survival in medieval times isn't just about illness, hunger, or cold. Sometimes it's about keeping a straight face when someone asks if your mill has spiritual rot. Evening again. Your shoulders ache, not from labor, but from clenching all day. There's a difference, and you know it now. Yesterday's festival loosened you. Today's noble visit retied the knot. But you're not done yet, because tonight, under the weight of an almost full moon, something old is happening. They call it the night watch, though no one's watching anything in particular. It's part ritual, part superstition. Once a month, a few villagers take turns staying awake till dawn, walking the edges of the fields and whispering protections into the wind. You've been invited, which is a polite way of saying conscripted. Mainstream historical fact. Night watches weren't just for safety, they were steeped in belief. Villagers feared spirits, wolves, and thieves, but also unseen forces. Curses, fey mischief, and restless souls. Many night watches were deeply ritualistic, aimed more at warding off bad luck than physical threats. You light a lantern and follow the others beyond the fence line. The night is cool, soft, and darker than you expect. The stars, though, are blazing, more stars than you've ever really noticed, like someone dropped glitter across a velvet sheet. The leader of the watch, Old Tom, carries a sack of items that he insists are charm tools. You peek in and see garlic cloves, a twist of wool, 3 bones, don't ask, and something that might be dried frog but could also be an old turnip. Tom assigns you a stretch of field near the woods. Just walk it slow. Whisper kind things. Don't whistle. Why not whistle? Because they whistle back. Okay then. So you walk. You don't believe in spirits. Mostly. But the night plays tricks. Trees seem to lean. Grass whispers in breezes you don't feel. Your lantern flickers in a way that feels intentional. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval villagers believed crops could be cursed by wandering spirits if the fields weren't blessed during liminal times. Equinoxes, solstices, or nights like this. Singing to the wheat or murmuring protection charms wasn't just spiritual. It was seen as essential farming practice. Halfway down your path, you hear a twig snap. You freeze, turn slowly. It's probably a fox, or a deer, or a peasant who's worse at sneaking than you are. But the shadows between the trees don't move the way shadows should. You squint. Nothing. Still, you whisper, softly, "Be kind. Be gone. Be fed. Be elsewhere." You don't know what it means, but Tom says it helps. And oddly, it does. The air feels less sharp, like the field is listening and it approves. Historians still argue whether these protective rites were holdovers from pagan practices, misremembered folklore, or just villagers trying to make sense of things they couldn't control. Either way, they were real to the people who walked these fields, muttering to the darkness and hoping the darkness muttered back something gentle. An hour passes, maybe two. Back at the meeting point, others start returning. A boy claims he saw a ghost cow. A woman insists she stepped in a puddle that wasn't there before, and now her feet feel cursed. Tom nods sagely and gives her a clove of garlic. You sit on a stone and stare at the moon, which seems larger than usual, bright enough to make your own shadow. That shadow sits beside you quietly, like a companion. Eventually, Tom blows out his lantern and says, "That'll do. The village is safe." Safe from what? No one knows. But you all feel it. The tightness in your chest releases just a bit, like you've done something important, even if the world never notices. You trudge home, tired in a deep, marrow-slow way. Your goat is snoring when you arrive, belly up and dreaming of festival glory. You crawl into bed, boots still on, and stare at the beams above. The night, for all its strange movements and whispering grass, has left you intact. You whisper, just once more, "Be kind, be gone, be fed," just in case. You don't wake to a rooster. You wake to silence, the kind that makes your ears strain, trying to hear something that isn't there. No breeze, no goat noises, no distant thud of someone tripping over firewood, just stillness. And that's when you realize today is the Sabbath, which means miracle of miracles, you don't have to do anything. No planting, no sweeping mud off other mud, no chasing poultry in emotionally damaging circles. You are, quite literally, commanded to rest. Mainstream historical fact. In most medieval Christian communities, the Sabbath was strictly observed. Depending on the century and the region, that meant no labor, no trading, and often long hours at church. It was considered not only religiously vital, but also a weekly reprieve from unrelenting toil. So you stay in bed a little longer, the scratchy blanket somehow luxurious today. Your body, trained to rise before the sun, is confused but grateful. Eventually, you wander outside. The village is quieter, softer. Kids are playing in slow motion. Someone's dog is snoozing belly up in the square. Even the geese are pretending to be reasonable creatures. You sit on a log and accept a hunk of bread from a neighbor who always seems to bake extra. You chew slowly, tasting every crumb like it's the first meal you've earned in weeks. Quirky tidbit. In some medieval villages, people believed baking on the Sabbath would cause your bread to never rise again, or worse, summon devils to spoil your dough. Others snuck in a little cooking anyway and simply pretended it was leftovers. After a while, the church bell rings. Not a harsh clang, but a low, melodic chime that rolls over the rooftops like a wave of warm broth. You file in with the others where you mostly stand, kneel, sit, repeat, your knees aching more from piety than purpose. The priest drones on in Latin. You don't understand a word, but the rhythm is familiar, comforting even. The building is cool, dark, and filled with the scent of wax and worn wood. You could fall asleep standing. Historians still argue whether medieval sermons were meant to educate, intimidate, or simply preserve power. For villagers like you, they often blurred into ritual background noise, more about presence than comprehension. After service, there's a communal meal, simple but filling. Lentils, bread, dried fruit if someone's been lucky. You eat beside your goat, who has followed you like a shadow all day, possibly still traumatized by its brief pageant career. As the afternoon drifts on, you do nothing, and that somehow feels revolutionary. You sit on the grass. You watch clouds. You whittle a stick into something vaguely sword-like and pretend you're not too old for it. Someone strums a lute, badly. A baby giggles. An elder tells the same story he's told every week for 20 years, and people still laugh in the same places. There's no war here, no plague today, no noble demanding to inspect your spiritually compromised mill. Just sunlight, sore muscles, and the vague joy of being unbothered for once. You look around at the people beside you, mud-stained, sunburned, missing teeth, and laughing anyway. They've survived famine, fevers, superstition, and occasional wolf attacks. And so have you. So here's the big truth they don't tell you in textbooks. Medieval life wasn't just suffering. It was also silly, sacred, stubbornly ordinary. 100 little acts of resilience stitched into each uneventful day. The bells ring again, signaling evening prayers. But this time, you skip it. You wander home, heart full, belly heavier than usual. Your goat hops into bed before you do. You crawl in after, wrap yourself in itchy warmth, and listen to the quiet. You've made it to the end of a full week in the Middle Ages. You didn't die of infection, starve, or get accused of sorcery. You got close, sure, but you've learned, adapted. You've whispered to fields, danced with daisies, and survived stew night. That deserves a little rest. Let's ease into it now. Wind down, final 300 words. The air grows slower. The fire has dwindled to its last glowing coal, casting soft shadows that stretch and yawn across the stone walls. Outside, the wind plays lazily through the trees, brushing the eaves with the gentlest hush. Even the stars, brilliant and cold, seem to pulse more slowly now. Your breathing falls into rhythm with the quiet. In and out, you let your limbs grow heavy, melted into the shape of the straw-stuffed bed beneath you. The scratch of the blanket fades to a dull comfort, a texture your body now knows by heart. You made it. You survived mud and mildew, nobles and nonsense, ghosts and goats. You lasted longer than most people thought you would. And in doing so, you caught a glimpse of something real, how life, no matter how old or hard, still finds room for joy, still makes space for laughter, still lets the heart be light when it needs to be. So let the weight of the week slip off your shoulders. Let the noise of the day fall away. The echoes of the past can wait. You've done enough. Feel the hush settle into your bones. Let your eyes grow soft and your breath deeper. This moment is yours and no one's asking anything of you now. Not the priest, not the pigs, not even the goat. Just quiet and sleep.